Under a single lamp, a thumb-sized shard of clay waits to speak. Not thunder. Not chariots. Just wedges pressed by a steady hand, and a civilization daring to turn power into procedure. Tonight we're going to the rooms behind the myths. Councils that smell of cedar, benches cold as stone, festivals that teach calendars how to behave. We'll meet the Anunnaki not as comic book giants, but as a council whose signatures were carved into clay and carried in law. Why did a goddess descend and return only by minutes filed? Who whispered to a reed wall and saved a world without breaking an oath? Which warrior shot a thief out of the sky to wrest back the tablet of destinies? And why did the council trust a tablet more than a thunderbolt? Walk the steps of a ziggurat, where the rod and ring weren't props but measuring tools. Read a boundary stone whose crescent, star and crown still worn. This field is watched. We'll watch empires slide the nameplates, Sumer to Babylon, without ever adjourn the meeting. We'll see Gilgamesh reach for immortality and come home with a different promotion. Not a life without death, but a city that could keep its word. And yes, we'll face the misreadings. No rockets in the cuneiform. No secret planet hiding behind Jupiter. The real secret is harder and better. Rules strong enough to survive kings. Then science enters the ruins. Gloves whisper. Lamps rake. A blank tablet flares with letters. Algorithms reunite fragments that sat in separate drawers for a century. Barley grains, fish ear stones and fingerprints in bitumen testify like quiet witnesses. What the ancients began with seals and oaths, we continue with microscopes and methods. Stay with me because in the next minutes you'll see how a necklace of blue beads halted a second flood, why the 7 judges mattered more than any crown, and what the last oath asks of every city that plans to live. If power can apologize, what does it sound like? If justice is an image rolled across wet clay, what does it look like today, on a screen in a courtroom at your front door? Measure. What? Remember. Repair. If those 4 words can hold a world together, the tablets will prove it, and the story you thought you knew will learn to speak. The first sound is not a trumpet or a cry of war. It is the hush of a reading room, a clock ticking, a page turned, a pencil paused above a margin. Outside, London rain frets at the windows. Inside, under lamplight, a grass-stained shard of clay, broken, ancient, ordinary, waits for someone to breathe it back into speech. The letters on it are not letters as we know them, but tiny wedges pressed into wet clay when kings were still only memories of taller kings. Across thousands of fragments like this one, a buried world has left its heartbeat. We begin with dust because the Anunnaki arrive furthest from spectacle. No flaming chariots, no thunder across the plain. They arrive as a problem in philology, an unsteady word in cracked lines, migrating between meanings as centuries pass. Anunnaki. In one age, the great gods, in another, august judges below. In some hymns an assembly in heaven, in others the stern council of the deep. They are not a single image but an archive of them, layered like the silt of a river that changes course yet keeps its name. Modern scholars, reading and rereading the tablets, place the term within the Mesopotamian pantheon, a class or council of deities tied to Anu, the high god of the sky, with the word itself shifting across time and genre. The clay does not give us a neat list, it gives us a chorus with parts that move. If you want to see where some of their power first takes on practical shape, go south, to the ancestral edges of marsh and sea, Eridu. In the old stories it stands as a beginning, a place of sweet water, ritual and instruction, where Enki/Ye, the god of wisdom, craft and the subterranean abyss, keeps a house whose foundations seem to drink the world. Even now, the ground there remembers, bricks slumped back into earth, the geometry of a vanished temple, a clay model boat that never again will launch. Archaeology describes Eridu as foundational, one of the earliest cities of Sumer, and yet the myths press further, insisting on a sanctum where decrees of civilization were allotted and the ordering of things began. We will come again to the me, those potent ordinances of culture, but for now attend to the mood, a city at the border of water and dust, where divine administration is imagined as a patient, daily labor. In one Sumerian hymn the camera pulls back. We're given an aerial view of creation as administration. Enki surveys the land and, among other acts of stewardship, situated dwellings for the Anunnaki gods, organized fields, fixed boundaries and set judges in their offices. The lines are ceremonial, but the effect is almost bureaucratic, as if the cosmos were a city that must be platted, staffed, and audited to run. In the cadence of that hymn, you can hear how the elders of the divine council are not merely terrible, they are responsible. The world is not only made, it is managed. And yet, from the moment humans appear in these stories, another register intrudes: fear and petition. Laws begin as comforts and quickly become tests. In the Akkadian Atrahasis, the council above deliberates on a noisy, multiplying humanity. Their solutions are cold: plague, silence, then a flood to reset the board. But between decree and disaster slips a murmur of mercy. Enki/A instructing the wise Atrahasis in riddles, the plan for a boat hidden in a conversation with a wall. After the waters, a compromise. New limits, new rituals, new distance between gods and men. Read across the tablets and the lesson bites. Even the assembly that decrees fate has to keep negotiating what it means to be just. The clay that carries these dramas has its own adventure. For millennia the libraries of Mesopotamia slept in ruined palaces and collapsed rooms, their shelves fallen into heaps, their catalogs scattered to winds that did not know they carried literature. In the 19th century, pickaxes and shovels and curiosity reopened those rooms. From the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh came a harvest of broken text. Thousands upon thousands of fragments that would be handled, puzzled over, and slowly reassembled into epics, hymns, treaties, receipts, mathematical problems, love songs, omens, and jokes. Among them, tablets of the creation myth Enuma Elish, where power moves like a storm and the right to decree destinies is fought over in the sky. It is not that one artifact can prove a myth true, it is that hundreds of fragments, across time and place, make a tradition audible again. But clay does not speak for free. One brilliance, cut into cliff and read through centuries, served as the key to unlock those crowded shelves. The Behistun inscription in western Iran, trilingual under the command of Darius the Great. With copies and courage, scholars such as Henry Rawlinson and Edward Hincks used its Old Persian text to triangulate Elamite and Babylonian cuneiform. From that outcrop, the world's first great writing system could be systematically deciphered, and a silence of more than 2,000 years began to stammer, then speak. The unlocking of cuneiform is not a side quest in our story, it is the turning of the first lock on the door where the Anunnaki waited. We return to the reading room. Another scholar leans over another shard. In 1872, an assistant at the British Museum named George Smith announces that among the Nineveh fragments he has translated a flood narrative, an ancient account with uncanny, independent parallels to the Book of Genesis. Newspapers gasp, crowds come to hear. In his wake, expeditions unearth more pieces, and the Epic of Gilgamesh gains its outlines. A king, a friend, a quest, a tale of limits and grief, and threaded through it all, the same council whose decisions can end a world. If the Anunnaki are sometimes judges below, sometimes elders above, their presence in the epic is a pressure, sovereignty at the margins of human desire. But let us not reduce them to footnotes. What draws us is not only taxonomy, the who, where, how many of the Anunnaki, but the texture of the imagination that kept invoking them. Imagine a night in Uruk when a reciter lifts his hands and the crowd hushes. The moon is a thin hook, the dust tastes of brick. He speaks of seven who decree, of gates that must be passed, of oaths that bite harder than swords. He names En and Enlil and Enki. He speaks of Inanna/Ishtar whose descent unthreads the world. He hints at judges whose decisions are older than walls. The audience knows these names like we know the names of months or streets. Here, in the heat, law is not a statute. It is a presence you can anger. In the daylight, the city makes it practical. Temples are ledgers. Priests are also accountants. Offerings double as receipts. Cylinder seals roll their tiny worlds on wet clay, a procession of gods and supplicants captured in a strip of repeating image. Ziggurats rise like staged mountains, architectural arguments that heaven and earth can be coaxed into traffic. The Anunnaki, whether imagined in upper council or underworld bench, infuse the texture of these practices. If a traveler asked why a boundary stone matters, a scribe might answer by telling a story about a time when the elders set the first boundaries, and the world learned its lanes. There are secrets here, but not in the sense of conspirators behind a curtain. The real secrecy is ritual, the way knowledge is gated, laddered, hidden in plain sight. The me, those civilizing decrees, are not scrolls you can check out of a library, they are powers recited, carried, sometimes stolen, often disputed. When a myth tells us that a deity seizes the tablet of destinies, it is dramatizing the contest over who gets to write the rules, and who must merely live under them. In such a cosmos, politics is never only human, and the weather itself can be understood as a vote. Centuries later, in Babylon, a different hierarchy will promote a different champion. We'll come to that, how old names survive inside new bureaucracies. Meanwhile, back at Eridu, the marsh grass clatters. A fisherman poles his skiff, a child cups water that tastes faintly of salt. In the shrine, a priest speaks to a sealed jar as if to a person. The jar is not the point, the speech is. In a world that observes the elders, you keep the fabric of things taught by saying the right words in the right order. Ritual is maintenance. Neglect is a kind of vandalism. In that light, the Anunnaki are not exotic beings, they are the grammar of reality, the strictness that prevents it from falling back into formlessness. And yet the texts never quite let us look them in the eye. In some hymns, the Anunnaki do homage in the great houses and take up dwellings among the people. In others, they sit in judgment where even kings go humbly, stripped of insignia, to hear their fates. The oscillation is deliberate. The gods are near, the gods are far. They are the counsel you thank for harvest, and the bench that will not be bribed. That double focus is what gives Mesopotamian religion its particular electricity, intimacy braided with dread. What, then, did the ancients hope would survive when they pressed these wedges into clay? Not just names and genealogies. They preserved procedures. How to pray. How to curse. How to sue a neighbor, build a wall, divide a field. How to mourn and how to enthrone. They preserved the right stories to tell when the river jumps its banks or a moon goes wrong. In that sense, the tablets are not relics. They are manuals. We read them now in silence, but they were written to be performed. Part ritual, part theater, part minutes from a meeting whose decisions still ripple. And in the quiet rooms where those fragments are read today, another kind of mystery grows. No matter how many pieces we rejoin, gaps remain, lines lost to fire, rain, and the sheer nudity of time. Some of those gaps feel like missing planks in a bridge. Others feel intentional, as if the storytellers left space for the present to stand. That is the mystery we will follow. How a word like Anunnaki can be both precise and drifting, how a council can be both place and idea, how justice can be imagined as a bench of elders and also as the grain of reality itself. Before we leave this first chapter, lean closer to the shard under the lamp. The wedge marks are not pretty. They are efficient, like tracks left by a tool that knows exactly what it is for. Somewhere inside those angles, a scribe long dead is still speaking. About houses built and boundaries fixed, about floods and compromises, about elders whose decisions are not always wise but are always consequential. We will walk those rooms, their temples, their gates, their courts. We will watch as different cities reshuffle the hierarchy and rename the top seats. We will listen for the same counsel, reheard in new accents. We will meet the flood survivor who remembers when the sky judges plan to end us, the goddess who will not stay in her place, the king who learns that even glory has fences. The story of the Anunnaki is not only the story of gods. It is a study in how people imagine order. To follow it is to learn how a civilization dreams of law, argues with fate, bargains with disaster, and writes all of that down so that strangers, under faraway lamps, might piece it back together and feel the old heat. The dust is not empty. It is crowded with voices. It waits for the next reader to turn the page and hear the council call the room to order. At the edge of the old marshes where reeds whisper like a congregation, a low mound rises from the clay, quiet, patient, almost modest for a place that once called itself the beginning. Here the earth remembers by layers. A temple was raised, then raised again, each rebuild lifting a sacred room a little higher, as if the city kept trying to stand on its own memory. The people who came here spoke of sweet water flowing beneath all things, an invisible river under the ground. They said that if you built your house on that hidden current and learned its rules, the world would answer with order. They called the hidden water the Abzu. They called their city Eridu. And they said its patron, the one who knew the deep, was Enki, later called Ye, the crafty lord of wisdom. In the oldest lists, Eridu is named the first city. In the understanding of priests and kings, it is where civilization learned to take a breath. Walk with me before the light is full. Mudflats shine like mirrors, the air smells of salt and silt. Somewhere, far off, the course of the Euphrates has long since shifted, yet the memory of its older channel still braids through this soil. In the oldest days, so the scholars who read the ground tell us, the temple rose through many lives. A simple cella no larger than a room, then a hall, then platforms, then the plan you recognize from 1,000 other shrines. 17 and even 18 superposed temple levels have been traced here, each one the city's heart in its time. The work of that remembering spanned millennia, from the first Abade builders into the ages when ziggurats put stairs beneath the sky. To read the mound is to read a schedule for holiness. The house itself had a name the way a person does. Yabzu, the house of the aquifer. Ingur, the house of the deep. Names that are doors. They tell you what is happening here. A meeting arranged between the waters you can draw with a jar and the waters you cannot see but must appease. In hymns, Enki is praised for driving the temple's foundation pegs into the Abzu, a poetic line that is also an engineer's boast, sinking the building's grammar into the ground's hidden grammar, lashing ritual to geology. To read those lines is to realize that for the builders of Eridu, theology was not separate from construction. Piety was poured into footings. If Eridu is the first city, it is not first by size. It is first in tone. The myths place it at a frontier between dust and water, where power is measured in the ability to make boundaries and keep them. In the old hymn I have watched scholars copy out, Enki in the world order, the god of Eridu does not roar so much as allocate. He fixes shores, appoints offices, assigns craft to craftswomen, judges to judgment, fisheries to fishers, and crucially the decreeing of fates among the high gods. It is a portrait of creation as administration. The cosmos in this telling is not born once, it is continually staffed. The gods are powerful, yes, but their truest power is bureaucratic, setting the lanes we will later mistake for nature. The ancients had a word for the packets of authority that make a culture run. Me. Think of them as charters, formulas, licenses, and blueprints in sacred form, how to do weaving, how to rule a city, how to sing a lament, how to crown a king. They could be bestowed, guarded, even, dangerous verb, stolen. And the great story told in Beerlit Eridu goes like this. Once, when Enki was drinking with Inanna, the brilliant goddess of Uruk, she coaxed from him the me, one by one, in a tally that reads like an inventory of civilization itself, and ferried them upriver to her own city. Enki sobered, sent his courtiers to stop her boats. The river tried to hold her. Uruk's walls received her cargo. And from that day, so the singer smiles, Uruk shone with arts once kept in Eridu's vault. Riddled through the comedy is a seriousness. Culture is portable, power is knowing which boxes to ship and which routes to take. This is where secrets begin to look like logistics. The treasure at stake is not gold, it is procedure. The me are the deep formats of human flourishing and control. If you own them, you can launch a city. If you lose them, you become peripheral to your own story. Eridu is not diminished by Inanna's caper. It is defined by it, becoming the city that learned what happens when wisdom drinks too much and art runs away with itself. And it also becomes a template for a familiar human mood, the melancholy of the old capital watching a younger city take the stage. The ground itself speaks too. When the modern diggers came, in the middle of the 20th century with notebooks, measuring tapes, and a patience for dust, they found a shrine rebuilt again and again, a cemetery of 1,000 box graves from Abade times, a model boat with a socket for a mast, and small figures with lizard-like features that, to modern eyes, feel more alien than ancestral. They traced the strata where the temple changed plan, watched a humble one-room sacred place bloom and finally be replaced by a platform for a ziggurat. They followed a canal's ghost, the man-made artery that once connected Eridu to the river's shifting body. Archaeology is a chorus of small details, and here the chorus sings. Long continuity, careful rebuilds, experiments in sacred architecture, persistence despite salinized fields and political tides. But let us step back inside the sanctuary while the light slants. The Yabzu is not only a room, it is a model of a worldview. In Mesopotamian myth, the fresh waters, the Abzu or Apsu, are primordial. From their union with the salt sea arises a family of gods, and from their quarrels, a cosmos we can live in. To stand in Eridu's temple is to stand at a claimed interface with that sweet underworld river. This is not metaphor for them, it is address. If you want rains on time, if you want canals to flow and not salt your land, you must honor the Abzu's patience. The priests of Eridu spoke to jars and to the ground not because they mistook them for people, but because they understood that the order we need is the favor we negotiate. Eridu's god is not only water, he is a certain temperament. Enki/Ye is the god who solves unsolvable things with cunning, who whispers the loophole into a flood decree, who rescues humanity not with thunder but with a workaround. He is the patron of craft and spells, of mathematics and fish traps, of the kind of intelligence that makes engines purr and treaties hold. When later cities rise, Uruk with its glare and speed, Babylon with its imperial patience, Eridu stays as the memory of a tone, the cool workshop at the back of the world where the rules are drafted and revised. Perhaps that is why the hymns call him seal keeper of heaven and earth, the one who knows how to stamp reality so that it counts. Yet even here, under the confidence of appointed offices and chartered arts, shadows move. The word Anunna, the elder gods, the assembly tied to Anu, does not sit still. In one text they receive dwellings among people, in another they sit as judges of the deep. Across centuries the title slides, sometimes the high council of heaven, sometimes the stern bench below. Eridu's stories help you feel the logic behind the slide. A cosmos in which the same elders who allot crafts and set boundaries must also, eventually, preside over consequences. Order, after all, is not only a plan, it is a court. If you step outside again and run your hand across the mound's cracked crust, you will feel time like dryness. The gulf that once lapped closer has retreated, canals have gone to dust, fields once green with barley were salted by generations of irrigation. The south yielded its political primacy to cities further north. Still, the shrine persisted long after the neighborhoods thinned. Pilgrims came to a holy site even when the city around it was a skeleton. The temple remained, a spine of memory in a changing land. That is another kind of secret, that belief can outlive the economies that built it, and that a small sanctum can outlast a market's roar. There is a detail I love because it is so material. In one report, a lump of blue glass surfaced from the mound, colored with cobalt, astonishingly early, a remnant of someone's experiment in binding sand and fire, and near it, a terracotta model of a boat with a hole for the mast and places to anchor stays and rudder. One object is a failed or perfected recipe, the other, a toy or a votive memory of movement. Together they read like a footnote to the Inanna story, recipes and ships, arts and routes, the means by which culture slides from place to place. Eridu dreamed of continuity, it also produced the tools of transfer. The mysteries we promised, a city of secrets, hidden histories, discoveries, they are not conspiratorial dramas tucked behind a curtain. They are the slow strangeness of a civilization that wrote its procedures as poems and its poems as procedures. They are the puzzle of a title, Anunnaki, that refuses to freeze into a single picture. They are the feel of a temple rebuilt so many times that the ground itself seems to rise to meet heaven. And they are the way a river can move, leaving a holy address miles from its old water. As the sun climbs, the mound warms and the names regain their weight. Iabzu-Ingur, Enki, lord of the sweet water beneath, Inanna, farrier of the Me, and /Anu, whose assembly makes a world decide. In the weeks to come, we will travel from this marsh-edge sanctum into flood rooms and underworld courts. We will watch the tablets of destiny change hands, and we will listen to the epic where kings learn what walls cannot keep out. But it begins here, with a temple whose pegs are hammered into an invisible river, and a city that decided the best way to honor the deep was to learn how to allocate. Eridu's lesson is sober, which is fitting for a god who, when sober, arranges fates. It says, "Do not confuse origins with ownership. The arts you nurture may someday sail away." It says, "If you want the world to cohere, treat boundary making as sacred work." It says, "The oldest city is not the one with the tallest towers but the one that teaches you how to connect what you can see to what you cannot." And it ends today with the same sound it began with, water under the ground, moving where it must, bearing on its back the weight of a house that has been rebuilt so many times that even the dust can recite its plan. Begin with a name spoken softly as if it might break, Anunna. Stretch it and a new ending arrives like a cloak, Anunnaki. You could spend a career inside that suffix, following how it rises and falls across centuries, shifts with dialects, and gathers meanings like a river gathers silt. To ask, who were the Anunnaki, is not to ask for a neat list. It is to open a door into an old audience chamber and find that the furniture has been moved between visits. The elders sit in a semicircle. The torches smoke. The clerk holds his tablet ready. The names are announced. The order is never quite the same. Their origin is a sky-pointing answer. They are the offspring of an, or those of an, En or Anu, the high god whose domain is the clean, unreachable vault above. But titles in this world are instruments, and instruments can be tuned. In some songs, Anunna names the great gods as a body, the august council above kings and storms. In others, Anunnaki tightens to a bench of underworld judges. There are tablets where the term shines like gold leaf on a royal decree. There are others where it is a shadowy collective, stern, many, impersonal as law. The surprise is not that the word moves. The surprise is that the people who used it lived inside its movements comfortably, like sailors who know the river shifts but still trust its banks. Look closely at the council. The tall names recur, and /Anu in Lil Enki /A, sometimes Ninhursag /Ninma, sometimes Sin /Nana, Shamash /Utu, Adad /Ishkur, and the fierce and complicated Inanna /Ishtar. But the badge Anunnaki is not pinned to every lapel at once. Sometimes it is a plume that designates the elder group, the ones who ordain cosmic offices. Sometimes it is a robe worn below by the magistrates of the dark. In one hymn the Anunna take up dwellings among the people, like visiting dignitaries whose presence dignifies the neighborhood. In another text the Anunnaki are 7 judges without faces, the weight behind verdicts that cannot be appealed. How can one word do both? Because power, in the imagination of these cities, had 2 rooms. One room was above, airy, bright, where decrees were drafted, crafts allotted, boundaries fixed. The other was below, sealed, stone cool, where decisions ripened into consequences. The same elders who staff the first room cannot avoid the second. If you are ancient enough to set the world's lanes, you are ancient enough to sit when souls arrive to learn how well they stayed within them. The term follows the function. When the story wants to watch creation as administration, it names the Anunna among the sky's organizers. When it wants to watch accountability, it invokes the Anunnaki as the bench that hears what happened after the harvest and the war. Between these rooms stand the cities, each with its temple, each with its pride. A city is a theology with bricks. When Uruk steals the arts, from Eridu, the story is about culture's routes. But it is also about how a council's composition can tilt with political weather. When Babylon rises with imperial patience, a different champion is lifted. The creation story is sung again, names are refiled, and the Anunnaki are placed where the new order needs them. This is not deceit. It is the frank acknowledgement that holiness is also a distribution list, and each city edits the list to read itself into the world's first paragraph. Scribes are the keepers of these edits. A scribe's reed is a chisel that carves not stone but time. 1 copy here, 10 there, a correction added in the margin that becomes scripture 2 centuries later. In their hands, the Anunnaki acquire a texture that is less about faces and more about offices. The elders in this telling are less like a family portrait and more like a constitutional court whose seats are named and whose occupants can be recited when needed. The gods are individuals, yes, with tempers and loves and grudges. But the word that holds them together, Anunna, Anunnaki, lets a singer speak of power as a plural with a single will. What did that will do? It ordained. It scheduled. It permitted and forbade. In the creation of order, the Anunna appear like city planners with cosmic pens. They appoint judges and boatmen, set the courses of rivers and the cadence of festivals, determine the channels through which favor descends and petitions rise. This is not the power of lightning, though lightning belongs to it. This is the power of procedure, of knowing which doors must open before others, which words must be said in which rooms, which days must be counted between sewing and cutting. The Anunnaki are the logic of those steps made sacred. There is a darker, necessary emphasis, death. In stories that descend into the underworld, the Anunnaki are the bench behind the veil, the presence you feel when gates close behind you and a registrar reads the line that is your life. They do not need to be many or few, they need to be there. When Inanna goes below, when a king dreams of the lands that favor has left, the Anunnaki are the pressure in the chamber, the expectation that this too is procedural, that even grief has a desk where forms are stamped. That is the terror and the comfort. The idea that what waits after breath is not chaos but a stern order that will hear you and weigh you and file you. It is not gentle. It is clean. Across this, another chorus whispers. The Ijiji, a separate body in some stories, the younger gods, the laborers who strain under work until a human substitute is invented to bear the load. Here the Anunnaki's age becomes more than a title. It becomes a role in a drama about delegation. Elder gods debate and decree, younger gods fetch and build, Mortals take up the weight and in exchange are folded into the council's attention, sometimes as petitioners, sometimes as problems. The plot is cold, but within it there is warmth. A god who cheats the decree to save a life, a goddess whose anger makes cities new, an old council that can be moved by the right lament sung at the right hour. The mystery we promised, secrets and hidden histories, lives in the gaps the tablets leave. On one fragment, a list of Anunna names. On another, the same list with substitutions. On a third, a context that changes the list's purpose entirely. It is tempting to choose one and call it definitive. The tablets resist. They insist on a living council, living not in the way animals live, but in the way charters live, revised, affirmed, re-signed across reigns. A scholar can trace the changes like a silt line on a wall. This configuration belongs to a hymn in a city under one king. That configuration belongs to a ritual when another dynasty held the keys to the storerooms. The hidden history is that theology is minutes from meetings where cities announce themselves. Some listeners want statues, not minutes. They ask for faces, for heights, for the number of steps between each throne. The stories can provide faces when they wish. The windlord whose command topples forests, the craftlord whose cunning solves impossible knots, the fierce lady of battle and desire whose descent unthreads heaven's order from below. But the collective name never quite freezes into a diagram. That slipperiness is the clue. The Anunnaki are the council as such. If you try to draw them as a fixed family tree, they tilt their heads and become something else. The weight behind kingship, the gravity that makes oaths stick, the weigher of harvest measures, the hush in the court when all speaking stops. There is a secret that looks almost mundane. The Anunnaki's authority appears when people behave as if it is there. A farmer brings a share to the temple. A judge refuses a bribe and says the elders are watching. A priest murmurs the words in the right order. A builder lays a foundation peg as prescribed. A fisherman sets his net on the day the calendar allows. Each act makes the council more real. In return, the world feels governed, terrible, yes, but legible. When law falters, when bribes are taken, when pegs are skipped, the Anunnaki seem farther away, and earthquakes become arguments about who moved the bench. Names can guard things. The name Anunnaki guards the idea that there is a highest assembly somewhere, even when cities fall, even when empires close their gates for the last time. Ruins are full of names that no longer point to living rooms. But this name points to a habit of mind that can be carried across languages and maps. The habit of imagining that justice exists above the throne, that fate is allocated in a room no general can storm. In that sense, the Anunnaki survive every dynasty that claimed them. They become the memory of a limit placed on power by something other than power. Listen again to that suffix. It can mark belonging, it can mark plurality, it can drift as words drift when they are old and loved. In one season, scribes prefer one spelling. In another, new orthographies creep into the schools. Clay hardens and survives to puzzle readers who will not be born until the cities that wrote the clay are themselves clay. The mystery is that, despite all this drift, when the reciter says Anunnaki, the audience knows where to look. Upward to the council's bright room, downward to the bench below, inward to the procedures that keep a covenant between river and field. And what of the human place in this? In the stories, we are both children and staff. We bring food to the shrines because gods have bodies in the cities. We tell stories because gods have ears. We obey calendars because gods keep appointments. We also argue. Petitions rise like smoke, and sometimes in the smoke, a loophole appears. An Enki murmuring to a wall so a man can hear and live. The Anunnaki can be bargained with, not because they are weak, but because the world they run includes mercy as a rule. The council's dignity is not diminished by a commuted sentence. It is preserved by it. There is a procedure for clemency. There is a form for reprieve. The secrets that thrill, the locked room, the stolen charter, the forbidden name, are already promised in the council's archive. Somewhere, in a storeroom behind a barred door, a tablet that once settled a boundary still remembers the names invoked to make the decision stick. Somewhere else, a treaty with a foreign king lists gods by titles that betray which cities were fashionable that year. Reading them is like reading old minutes and recognizing your own century's quarrels. Who owns the riverbank? Who appoints the judge? Who wears the badge that says, "I speak for the first room"? To end, return to the question and let it stay a little open. Who were the Anunnaki? They were the elders by which a civilization imagined order. They were the gravity that held stories and lawsuits together. They were the breath behind oaths and the chill behind verdicts. When we meet them in the flood story, they are the planners and the repenters. When we meet them in the epic, they are the limits on a king's reach. When we peer into the underworld, they are the bench, implacable as stone. And when we stand under a ziggurat at dusk and listen to priests' read lines that nobody living remembers writing, they are the we in the phrase we decree, the old plural voice that makes a world more than weather and appetite. In the next rooms, their instruments will come into view. Destinies engraved and contested, oaths bound to gates, a court below where even gods remove their crowns. But before we climb those steps, hold the word itself on your tongue for a breath. Anunnaki. It tastes like procedure sung aloud, like a charter read at dawn, like a door that opens only when the right names are spoken. Names that are older than any one city and younger than justice itself. Night gathers over the plain and a cold wind walks the canals. In the upper court where torches smolder and the ceiling disappears into smoke, the elders take their seats. It is the oldest of scenes, a council convened not for ceremony but for remedy. Tablets wait on laps, styluses click against fingernails. Somewhere in a side chamber, a scribe copies the oath formula once more. You can feel in the hush that something essential is at stake, not a skirmish over fields, not a grievance about tribute, but the calibration of the world itself. When the Anunnaki meet in secret, the air becomes thin. Decrees made here will send weather into motion. The problem has a sound before it has a name. It is the clamor of labor and laughter and quarrel and song, the chorus of a species that has learned how to multiply. Once, long ago in the stories, the younger gods, those bright, tireless Igigi, strained under the loads of digging and carrying until they rebelled. A solution was designed. Humans, quick and soft, would take up the weight. Clay was brought, a divine element, blood from a god of intelligence, was mixed into the earthen paste. A priestess spoke the right words and taught the mud to breathe. It worked too well. Humanity flowered in numbers and noise, filling the nights with the evidence of life. The council's first gift became the council's first complaint. In the quiet, Enlil's voice carries like a drum hit from far away. He is the lord of air, the keeper of order by command. He has listened to the reports. Settlements swelling, canals crowded, offerings good, yes, but followed by a racket that travels even to the thresholds of heaven. The elders nod. Order must be audible to command, and the earth has grown loud. They do what councils do when faced with a problem they help design. They legislate. A plague is sent, an invisible correction that figures itself as a god in its own right, walking between houses, touching this one, sparing that, turning fever into instruction. It almost works. The city learns a new ritual and outmaneuvers the calamity. Priests assemble, a river is invoked, a god who governs water and wisdom whispers a countermeasure. People survive. Grain returns to baskets. The nights become noisy again. In council, faces harden. They escalate. Drought follows, a parchment-thin summer that bleaches the ditch banks and makes fish bones shine in the sun. When drought teaches less than intended, a famine deepens the argument, turning household jars into drums of emptiness. Each time, somewhere behind the ruling Enki, lord of the deep intelligence that sits under things, intervenes with a loophole, a ritual, a practical kindness slipped through the lattice of law. This is not rebellion, it is revision. It is the kind of mercy that lives in the margin. The elders meet again and the doors are sealed. What they decide now is the heaviest of solutions, the one that does not discriminate or teach but resets. In the recesses of the chamber where silence eats echoes, a flood is decreed. The decision is not made lightly, it is signed by titles, sealed with names that bind even the signers. A date is fixed. A storm is scheduled. Outside the sky looks ordinary. That is how secrets work. The world behaves as usual while a plan, coiled like a rope in darkness, waits for its pull. Some councils, imagining themselves perfect, cannot be moved by love. This one can be. Enki knows the schedule. He knows the oaths his hand helped swear. Oaths are not only walls, they are doors if you know where the hinge is hidden. The story remembers him speaking not to a person, because that would be a breach, but to a thing that can listen without being named. He leans toward a reed wall, and in that dual voice of law and kindness, he tells the wall what a man he loves must hear. There will be a flood. He does not say you, though he means you. He does not say build, though every syllable is an instruction. That is how mercy moves when justice is watching. On a day that has not yet turned strange, a man begins to measure. He measures wood with a rope, calculates widths that equal lengths, runs his hand across the grain as if it were a friend's back, and warms bitumen in a pot until it shines like a tiny knight. The craft he erects is a world mock-up. Walls that can bear the weight of rain, decks in layers like the heavens, compartments for breath and seed and memory. In one tradition, the vessel is a barge, a cube with steadiness instead of speed. In another, it is a coracle made enormous, a woven bowl waterproof to a river's logic. The details vary like dialects, but the intention is the same, to gather a remnant large enough not just to live, but to restart verbs, eat, sow, marry, name. The neighbors, always the chorus in these episodes, watch a house grow where no harbor is. They ask because people always ask when a single man's sincerity outpaces their calendar. What do you think you're doing? He does not answer in a way that would make sense to them. How could he? Secrets are not only kept from enemies, they are kept from friends to spare them a weight they cannot carry. He keeps loading. He counts pairs. He tests the door. When the day arrives, it is not dramatic for the first minutes. Clouds gather over empty land the way they have done 1,000 times, the heat becomes a lid and the smell, earth before rain, climbs into the nose. Then the lid drops hard. The god of storm bends himself over the plain as if to listen to his own work, and what he hears is the unstitched sound of panic. Rivers reject their beds. Canals unlearn their banks. Houses that believed in themselves become props in a theater where water plays every part. The elders above are not as immune as they pretend. Their own storm frightens them. Some texts remember a goddess crying out, not in anger but in sorrow that refuses to be hidden by title. This is the mystery behind the procedural face, that even decrees can become unbearable to their authors. Inside the vessel, life scurries and tramples and sleeps. The air is complicated. Fear smells like pitch. Outside, absence proliferates. The flood is not just depth, it is duration. It trains those within to count the world again from nothing. There is a moment, no one can decide later if it lasted a second or a week, when the rain's percussion becomes a sort of silence, because there is nothing left that can answer it. Then, by degrees too small to be remarked until they are huge, the terrible sound thins. Gravity begins to remember its craft. The boat's bottom remembers the possibility of ground, first as rumor, then as bruise, then as fact. On a ridge that will someday have a name, a door unseals. Light enters like an animal, suspicious, skittish, then bold. The survivors do not leap out in joy. They climb out in caution as refugees entering a house that may still be occupied by disaster. They test the world with a bird that circles back with news. Somewhere there is a land for feet. When feet find it, the first act is not a survey or a boast. It is an offering. Smoke rises, grain burned to a sweet, useless perfection. Incense that has no purpose but to say, we are grateful. Meat that will not be eaten because it has already been given. Gods who had hidden their faces in the storm now flock to the scent the way insects find a lamp. Ashamed, hungry, relieved at the return of a relationship as old as the first altar. News travels upward from smoke to title. Enlil arrives and finds evidence of survival. His anger is not only rage at disobedience. It is the furious knowledge that the old problem will bloom again. Noise, multiplication, the dilution of command by chorus. He turns, he must, to the one who always knows where the hinge is. Enki does not deny what he has done. He proposes instead what councils invent when they can no longer afford to be absolute. Policy. Let there be limits built into the human story. Days counted out so that the span of a life is a tether, the womb not guaranteed, offices of celibacy and withdrawal to honor the gods and soften the arithmetic. The words are cold as tools and merciful as tools. Civilizations are erected from such compromises. A goddess lifts a necklace, blue beads bright as sky shards, and swears by its links to remember this pain and not repeat it lightly. The gesture turns memory into a boundary. Boundaries, in this universe, are sacred when they are sung and dangerous when they are mute. The flood becomes not only a story about water but a curriculum. On one tablet, it is a lesson in humility. On another, it is a case study in governance. Escalation, unintended consequences, backchannel mercy, and the invention of long-term controls that can be lived with. On a third, later and sharper, it becomes a parable about a king who goes seeking the secret of not dying and learns what every flood survivor already knows. that the gift granted to one generation cannot be made into a policy for the next. The clay remembers this counsel in layers. An old Babylonian scribe copies the lines with a strong hand. A later Assyrian librarian catalogs the fragments in a palace library already worried about its own future. A scholar in a 19th century museum fits broken edges together like a mason restoring a wall. Each custodian keeps the secret alive by refusing to call it solved. In the lacunae, those wounds where fire licked out a column of wedges, you can feel the ache of missing minutes. But the outline is clear enough to pin the theme. The elders are not abstractions. They are managers of a living system that sometimes jolts them into decisions so sharp they flinch afterward. What of the man who measured wood and counted animals? In some versions he is allowed to live apart, a relic of a world that no longer exists. In others he returns to the ordinary arithmetic of days and learns to carry on without the constant expectation of disaster. Either way, the secret he carries is not the geometry of a boat. It is the knowledge that law can be both implacable and bendable, that the world has a grammar and that mercy, to be effective, must speak it. He knows that salvation arrived not as a trumpet but as a whisper spoken to a wall. In a universe run by councils and seals, whispers are not trivial. They are the breath by which a charter keeps a human face. Down in the city, after the waters have receded and the dead have been named, people do what people always do: they rebuild. They haul silt that will be fields next year. They hammer foundation pegs for a shrine that, if honored, will braid river to ritual again. The calendars are reissued with small adjustments. The old songs are sung with a new catch in the voice when they arrive at the part where the storm remembered it could be ashamed. Children follow priests carrying baskets of first fruits and learn the choreography of gratitude. At funerals, the new limits are recited without bitterness, as if to say, our span is a sentence with a period now. That period helps the sentence make sense. The council meets again as councils must. This time the agenda is routine. Festivals, appointments, the allotment of offices. Somewhere in the notes is a line about the oath taken with the blue beads. It seems minor beside the larger headlines of empire and war, but it is not minor. It is the thread that keeps the world from choosing reset as its first solution. In that thread you can feel the hidden discovery of the flood. That power learns. The elders do not resign, they adjust. The Anunnaki remain what they were in the beginning of our story, older than kingship, closer to the grain of reality than any one temple. But now they carry a bruise that has become prudence. If you return to the mound of a ruined city and pick up a shard that once carried a line from this chapter of the world, you may see only wedges that look like bird tracks. But held under a lamp, the clay glows with the warmth of a room where law and kindness argued and came away married. The secret of the flood is not that there was once too much water. It is that a cosmos capable of severity is also capable of memory. In that memory, the human clamor is not a flaw to be erased but a fact to be shaped. By calendars and vows, by ceremonies that tie harvest to humility, by judges who know that the bench below is watching. The flood did not end the story, it taught the council how to keep it from ending again. And so, as reed beds wave in a wind that no longer smells of bitumen and dread, the world resumes its work. In the houses, children sleep. In the temple, lamps burn down to black and are replaced. Far above or far below, the texts disagree where the elders rise from their seats. The meeting is adjourned. The minutes are filed in a language that will die and be resurrected by strangers. Outside, the river hushes itself against its banks like a pupil doing well in a lesson. The decree has been edited, the grammar holds. In a room that smells of cedar and lamp smoke, a priest places a clay tablet on a linen cloth as gently as if he were lowering a child into sleep. The tablet is no larger than a hand, ridged at the edges by a scribe's careful fingers. It glows where oil has darkened it. The wedge marks run in neat rows like furrows after rain. A seal roll lies beside it, ready to be pressed. The priest inhales, and for a breath the sanctuary remembers an older room, an older brightness, where such tablets were not receipts or prayers but levers. Instruments by which fate itself could be made to keep an appointment. The name we have for those instruments is a name that tastes of authority and peril at once: the tablets of destiny. Do not imagine that destiny is a misty thing, hovering somewhere above the city like a weather that cannot be touched. In the old stories, destiny can be written down. Not merely predicted, not merely sung but inscribed, set into the disciplined earth of clay, numbered and witnessed and bound with seals. The Great Council keeps such tablets close because they are not lists of future headlines. They are the charters that tell the world how to behave when the headlines arrive. If power is the right to decree, then the tablet of destinies is the paper on which decree becomes reality. There are nights when even such paper changes hands. The chamber is high, the wind in its rafters sounds like a tired animal breathing. Enlil, Lord of Air and Ordnance, wears the badge across his chest, a strap that holds what others dare not even touch. When summonses must be sent, when judgments require the weight of the first room, when sovereignty must be pronounced for all to hear, he lays his hand on the tablet, and the syllables he speaks take on the strength of the tablet's script. Around him the Anunnaki stand with the stillness of pillars, the old court attentive to the smallest change in tone. Here the world is not argued, it is formatted. From outside the order comes a feathered shadow. And Zu, eagle lion, storm-feathered thief, watches the Lord at his ablutions. The water in the basin shakes with Enlil's breath. The tablet rests for a moment in safety's careless cradle. The predator knows a seam when he sees one. He strikes, not with a cry but with a silence so complete that even the oil lamps forget to flicker. When he rises into the rafters, the tablet rides his breast like a stolen day. The hall is not merely astonished, it is unmade. Orders shouted by gods are only noises if the charter that makes orders binding has flown. The world below feels it before the council finds language. Winds disagree, edicts blur at the edges. Demons that were content to live under rules lift their heads and ask whether rules still exist. In palaces, judges reach for laws they find themselves suddenly unable to quote. Even barley senses it, ears that knew when to bend in the old rhythm hesitate, and harvest days arrive like guests without invitations. The elders in the first room taste the humiliation that only administrators know, to have a perfect schedule and no authority to keep it. The tablet is gone. What they decide now will be done not because a decree bites but because someone can make the air obey. Champions are named, then unnamed. There are contenders with strong arms and weak reasons. There are gods whose thunder sounds impressive until it is measured against the requirement to bring back what must not be lost. The council does not send Enki first, though he is the clever one, for this is a matter of force before it is a matter of cunning, and the wound is fresh. Messengers are dispatched past cloud banks and into gorges carved by old storms. Their voices return carrying the taste of refusal. In the end, a name is put forward with the indulgent certainty of a father praising a difficult son. Ninurta, warrior of the plow, lord of the sling, the one who can turn a mountain into a trophy and make bullhide sing when stretched over a drum. He accepts because every story that wants to restore law must send out a blade that can become a pen. He climbs a sky that is not sure of itself and finds the thief crouched on a ledge cut into wind. And Zeus' feathers catch the light like knives. On his chest, the tablet rests as if it had always belonged there, lines of cuneiform against the soft engine of a thief's breath. Ninurta calls down the charge like a lawsuit. By the rights of the elders, by the weight of the first room, by the necessity without which nothing is itself, return what you have taken. The answer is the kind of laughter that courts remember only once. Spears leap and learn hesitation. Nets fly and come back empty. The air itself feels treacherous, as if the tablet were teaching gusts to favor theft. When force bruises but does not solve, counsel becomes trickery with a righteous face. Enki steps forward, his eyes full of arithmetic. He teaches Ninurta a precision that is also a mercy. Find not the feather but the vein beneath it, not the wing but the ligament on which wing depends. Strike the ligature that holds the wind to the thief's will. Bind the muscle that bends the sky. In war this is a cruel instruction, in law it is pedagogy. The champion learns to let the world keep its violence intact while he subtracts from the thief the ability to use it. The sling sinks. The air yelps as if pinched by an invisible tutor. And Zu falls, clutching at a sky that is no longer on his side. The tablet is recovered with a tenderness that reminds you power can be gentle when it chooses. Hands lifted. Breath is held. For a hanging moment the council considers whether the humiliation can be erased simply by resuming what had been interrupted. They know better. Law robbed and restored must be reconsecrated. Safer than before, yes. Wiser perhaps, but also marked by the knowledge that rules live not because they are beautiful but because they are guarded. The assembly sings the words that remind the world how to listen. The tablet's lines are polished with oil. It returns to Enlil's chest with a weight heavier than before. the weight of a story that will be told whenever someone asks why law requires vigilance. The story of theft is only one of the tablet's biographies. There is another room, later, more imperial, where a young champion stands with a calm that looks like fate admiring itself. Monsters have already taught him what it means to be necessary. He does not request authority. He arranges the air so that authority looks like a conclusion others will inevitably reach. In the pageant of kingship recited for Babylon's new year, Marduk receives the charter of rule, and the tablet of destinies gleams on his breast like a second heart. The chorus lifts him not only for what he has slain but for how he can administrate. The Anunnaki, who have seen assemblies come and go, lean toward this new grammar and find it precise. They inscribe the change not as a rupture but as continuity wearing a new face. Here is the secret that is not shy about being a secret. The tablet is never merely an object. It is a ritual in hard form. Its lines are only lines until they are spoken. Its power is not a glamour inherent in clay but a covenant between readers, speakers, and the weight that keeps the world from drifting. When a city holds a festival and the king's hand brushes the tablet's grooves, he is not touching magic. He is touching responsibility, the old agreement that a ruler's breath will be measured against the syllables that have outlived every ruler. When a judge sets a boundary stone and names the gods who witnessed the boundary, he leans on the tablet not as a fetish but as a precedent. What does cuneiform have to do with cosmos? Everything. To write is to fix. To fix is to invite memory to sit down. To invite memory is to create an audience for judgment. A field that was yours in speech becomes yours in clay and can be defended. An oath that was only wind becomes wedges that survive fires and quarrels. This is why the tablet inspires both reverence and revolt. The rebel wants to tear the minutes from the court. The faithful want the minutes filed where water cannot find them. The thief in the rafters and the champion on the ledge are both telling the same truth from opposite sides. That destiny is a public record, and whoever controls the archive has his hands on the throat of the day. There are softer scenes. In a shrine whose blue-painted bricks have forgotten their first brightness, a young scribe copies a formula from a teacher's lone tablet. The teacher watches his hand, correcting not only signs but posture. "Hold the stylus like this," he murmurs, "so that the angle of the wedge has authority. Authority can be seen even before it is read." In another city, a queen lays her seal against wet clay with the pride of someone who knows that a small cylinder can contain an entire world. On that seal, gods process like officials in a tidy dream. One lifts a hand in blessing, another holds a rod and ring that symbolize measurement, another, slightly apart, touches a tablet as if to remind the scene that beauty without procedure decays into accident. There are darker scenes too. A king, frightened by omens, tries to procure from a priest the assurance that the tablet's lines can be edited by private gift. The priest smiles the practiced smile of someone who has been asked to unfasten the sky. He names the offerings that will cleanse a house, the nights that must be kept quiet, the measures of meal and beer that make a ritual sing. What he does not offer is the lie. A charter that can be bought is not a charter, it is ransom. Even tyrants prefer their destinies written in clay rather than in the froth of their own breath, for clay humbles them with the one limit they find themselves in secret grateful for, the limit of having to answer to something old. In another text that smells of the sea, sailors talk under a striped awning about a rumor from the north. A city where the tablets of destiny are kept in a hidden room behind doors layered like scales. Only 3 people know the route. Only one can speak the words that will not go sour in his mouth at the last door. A boy listens with the confusion of wonder and envy. He pictures the tablets as if they were emeralds. He does not yet know that emeralds can be stolen and sell badly, while clauses, once accepted by a city, cannot be fenced in any market. The secret at the heart of the shrine is this: the tablets are guarded because meaning must be guarded, not because someone fears a thief with a clever bag. Let us return for a breath to the Anunnaki's bench below. There, the tablets, if they are present at all, are present as tone rather than object. The judges do not need to read to know, they need only to weigh. But their weighing presumes a grammar. A life is placed on the balance, and the counterweight is not a scale pan of gold, it is the expectation formed by 1,000 open proclamations, treaties signed, boundaries set, oaths sworn, calendars kept in public, festivals timed to moons that do not require the king's permission to wax. The underworld's fairness is the echo of the first room's procedures. This is why the tablet's theft was a catastrophe. Not because a trinket went missing but because the echo lost its source. If you stand before a modern museum case where a clay tablet lies like a sleeping animal, you may feel an ache that has nothing to do with archaeology. It is the ache of seeing procedure made beautiful. The wedges are tidy not for ornament's sake, but because order has a shape the hand can learn. The case label will speak of myth and law, of a language that died and was dug up, of a court whose minutes were stored in shelves that collapsed and were raised again by strangers. What the label cannot tell you is the sensation that rises from the chest to the throat when you realize that the old stories were not kidding. That power once wore its authority on a string across the breast, and that cities sang to remind themselves why the string mattered. The tablets of destiny are the hinge of our tale. Before them, power felt like weather. After them, weather could be named and scheduled and prayed into a shape that fed barley. Before them, kingship was a shout. After them, it was an office that feared to mispronounce the oath. They show us the Anunnaki not as a cloud of awe but as the custodians of a filing system whose files are stars and harvests and justice. They reveal the mystery that history keeps trying to cover with new paint, that civilizations survive not because they are brave, but because they remember what they said yesterday and mean to say tomorrow. Night returns to the cedar-smelling room. The priest lifts the seal roll, presses it into a bed of clay, and leaves behind an image so small it could go unnoticed on a hurried day. A god touching a tablet, a human kneeling, a crescent above them like a sentence that has found its period. He folds the linen, banks the lamps, and goes out into streets that trust themselves to sleep because somewhere, above, below, in rooms of smoke and in courts of dust, the charter has been returned to its place and the world, newly reminded, agrees to be itself. Begin with a hush the size of a city. Torches smolder at the gate of Uruk. A priest's sleeve darkens where tears have touched it and dried. A king who has never learned how to bow learns how to bow to absence. The first noise after grief is paperwork. Tablets brought, oaths taken, arrangements made that pretend to be ordinary. But nothing is ordinary now. A friend is gone. Enkidu, the wild man shaped to be a mirror and a leash, has been claimed. In such a world you can conquer forests and still find yourself helpless before a door that opens downward. Gilgamesh answers helplessness the way kings do. He sets his jaw and goes hunting for a voice that can overrule death. He is not the first in these stories to ask for a path through that door. The cities know such routes, written not on maps but on the body where ritual sits. They speak of a descent not as rumor but as procedure. 7 gates, 7 surrenders, an etiquette of loss meant to keep the deep from boiling over into the streets. When the goddess Inanna, Akkadian Ishtar, went below, her radiance was stripped one layer at a time. At the bench of judgment, the elders of the underworld stared with a look that kills and spoke with a voice that condemns. In the Sumerian text they are named plainly, the Anunna, the 7 judges, who render verdicts against trespass and pride. Their words turn a goddess into a corpse and hang it on a hook like a caution affixed to law. Even in the later Akkadian telling, when the names have shifted and the style has sharpened, you can see the same machinery hum. Ereshkigal orders her minister to bring out the Anunnaki and seat them on golden thrones before the final reversal. The sprinkling of life water and release can happen at all. It is not theater, it is government. The underworld's mercy, when it arrives by minutes filed, by a bench convened, by titles seated in rank. No decree, no resurrection. No quorum, no return. Gilgamesh does not descend, yet. He begins, rather, with a dream that feels like a memo smuggled from the first room. Enkidu wakes in the night and tells the king he has seen the great gods confer. Anu, Enlil, Shamash, names like pillars, have weighed their hunts and insults and settled on a penalty. Not both of them, one. Not the crowned one, the friend. A sentence plain as a line in clay, Enkidu must die. The dream is a warrant wearing the voice of heaven, and the city will spend the rest of the night failing to breathe. Illness follows not as punishment but as procedure does, step by terrible step. Enkidu curses the gate they built for their forest triumph and the trapper's house where he was first taught to eat bread and sit in chairs. Then, chastened by Shamash, he blesses instead, because a man who is dying learns quickly which words to keep. He dreams again of the house of dust, where kings kneel and crowns are stored like broken tools. It is not torture that defines that house, it is sameness. The judges are not named in the dream, but their breath is everywhere. The expectation that what you were will be weighed and filed, and that even glory becomes a kind of powder when rubbed between the fingers of forever. When the body is finally quiet, Grief turns a king into a fugitive. Gilgamesh abandons his clothes, lets his hair go animal, and walks toward the place where instruction hides, the edge of the world where a flood survivor lives in a house of stories. Wise men tell him that no mortal may find the path. Tavern keepers tell him to eat and be glad. He refuses both good advice and despair. What else is a king for if not to test the hinge of a cosmic door? The whisper through the city is that he is not just hunting immortality. He is going to interrogate the bench itself, the seven who look like law and must therefore answer to the questions only grief has the right to ask. That is the secret within the swagger. This is not an adventure, it is litigation. If you ask a scholar to point where the seven judges sit, she will show you lines in clay rather than a map. She will read the Sumerian descent where the Anunnaki are explicitly the seven judges, and then she will read the epic and tell you that the titled judge of the Anunnaki is linked, fragmentarily but not fancifully, to Gilgamesh himself in a later tablet, as if to say, the man who challenged death also came to be imagined as a magistrate of those who weigh it. Myth edits reputations the way dynasties edit ledgers, and somewhere in that editing the king's quest becomes preparation for a seat at the very bench that once terrified him. The story keeps its teeth and gives him, in time, a robe, but that is for later retellings and broken lines. In the tale before us, the king presses on. He kills the lions that snarl at dawn because he must, and because a hero who cannot sleep without a trophy is a man who is not yet ready to hear a librarian's voice. He reaches the gate of the mountains where the sun goes in and comes out, and bribes the scorpion guardians with the only currency that passes without clink, terrorless resolve. He walks a tunnel so black that time loses count, and comes out into a garden where things grow as if the flood never happened. There he meets Siduri, who says the tender heresy that has rescued more mortals than any god's favor: eat, or your portion is in the day. He declines as kings must. Behind her soft doctrine he suspects a surrender that would taste like dust. It is Utnapishtim who finally answers with a story that is itself a judge. We were warned. We built. We floated. We offered. The gods regretted the mass of their wrath. Limits were assigned so that cities could breathe without expecting storms to erase their names. The survivor's tale is not only about weather. It's about minutes and oaths, how the world learned to institutionalize prudence. It does not grant what the king came for. It grants an herb with thorns that can reset a body's clock by a season or two. The serpent takes it because serpents are symbols of cycles and do not need permission to molt. Gilgamesh sits on a rock and understands, too late for the herb but in time for the rest of his life, that immortality is a word for archives and gates rather than for skin. Here is where the seven judges re-enter, though you never see their faces. The epic refuses the neat miracle, it refuses the final, private gift. In doing so, it makes public sense. You can hear the logic. If a king could secure eternity with a trick, the bench would be a door you could bribe. But in this world, eternity belongs to titles and cities and lines pressed into clay that outlast the hands that pressed them. The Anunnaki are judges precisely because they cannot be bought, only convened. And the secret justice of the story is that the one man who begged them for an exception is the one man who returns home ready to administer law without pretending he is its author. When Gilgamesh reaches Uruk again, he touches the walls the way a scribe touches wet clay, carefully, with instruction in his fingers. He reads his own city aloud to himself. The parapet courses, the baked brick, the foundation they hammered into the deep. He hears a voice that is not his, the voice of a recorder who will one day preface the standard version with a prologue naming him builder, seeker, and scribe. In that preface you can feel the underworld's bench smiling a small, hard smile. The king wanted to be spared. He is given instead the job of making sure his people live where justice can find them quickly. It is not cruelty. It is promotion. There are scholars who read the epic and underline the scenes where Anunnaki means judges of the dead, and there are dictionaries that list the terms movements from heavenly elders to chthonic bench. Both are right because the stories are not trying to freeze a chart. They are trying to keep a city trained to obey sentences that outlive kings. Britannica reduces it neatly, Anunnaki as judges in the epic and in the descent myth, and for once the summary holds. The details are richer, the lines longer, but the arc is clear. Power is measurable because it reports to a room that cannot be stormed. Gilgamesh's afterlife in the tablets flickers. In one tradition he becomes a judge himself, judge of the Anunnaki, as if the quest he failed qualified him to weigh others. In another, he is a door warden in the House of the Dead, a title that turns heroism into receptivity. A man who once tore cedar from a mountain now opening and closing for those who have no more strength to open anything. The multiplicity is not error, it is pedagogy. Kingship is service. Courage becomes custody. The seven look on, impersonal as law. The king, once their petitioner, becomes their colleague. What does a bench require of the living? That we remember. Cities decode this requirement into liturgy. Laments sung on appointed days, boundary stones kissed by officials before planting. Funerals that recite the names of the judges not to flatter them but to keep their sentences present in harvest and trade. The seven are invoked not so that a soul may skip the line, but so the line will exist at all. That is the hidden discovery within the epic's bravest refusal. The door downward is sealed not only to keep you out, but to keep meaning in. Return before the chapter ends to the room where Enkidu's body cooled. Had the king been given what he demanded, there would have been no learning, only repetition. And repetition of triumph is boredom with a golden helmet. Instead, the story gives him the moral equivalent of blue beads lifted before a vow, a memory he cannot put down. He builds, writes, judges, and in judging he feels behind his back the weight of that other bench, the seven who do not smile but are not cruel. In the spaces of the city where women bake and men mend ropes, the law becomes a kind of weather, expected, sometimes unwelcome, always larger than anyone's appetite. This is how a civilization stops worshipping storms and begins to trust schedules. The chapter began with a hush, let it end with a quieter one. Night settles on Uruk's walls like a seal rolled on warm clay. Somewhere below, in a room nobody ever finishes describing the same way twice, the seven sit. They do not speak unless spoken to by deeds. When they do, their voice is the sound of a sentence finding its period. The king sleeps without the herb, without the trick, without the loophole he once demanded. He sleeps, instead, under a charter, which is to say under the only immortality that cities can promise. That when he is dust, the bench will remain, and his name will be recited by strangers who learned from him how to stand in a line and call that posture hope. Imagine the council chamber as a movable office. The same elders, the same titles, the same austere air, and yet the desks have been rearranged. Nameplates are slid along a polished table. The minutes will still be filed, but the chair at the head has changed. This is what it felt like when the gods were reseated from Sumer's old city-states to Babylon's imperial grammar. Continuity on the surface, an audacious edit underneath. In this edit, a young champion becomes chief administrator, and the Anunnaki, those elders who once seemed to float above cities like law itself, are assigned their places in a new bureaucracy. The epic that tells the story is as practical as it is cosmic. The backdrop is a crisis sung in hard consonants. The Sea Mother raises an army, a war cabinet convenes, the badge of command, the tablet of destinies, hangs at the breast of the wrong commander. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, Tiamat enthrones Kingu and fastens the tablet to him, granting his orders the terrible force of inevitability. This is not allegory to the ancients, it is administration gone rogue. Marduk meets the revolt with instruments of weather and wit, defeats Tiamat, strips the tablet from Kingu, seals it, and fastens it on his own chest before setting the world in order. To recite that sequence, usurpation, recovery, resealing, is to rehearse how authority passes properly from chaos to charter. What comes after victory is more revealing than the battle. Appointments. The vanquished are chained, the loyal are promoted, shrines are founded and handed over, and the elders, Anunnaki and their younger counterparts, are seated in rank with portfolios that read like a cosmos turned into a city ledger. Marduk receives not only a throne but names, a litany of titles that fold other deities' powers into his jurisdiction until the list itself feels like a legal code sung aloud. Later tradition remembers 50 names, a poetic way of saying that supremacy has been bureaucratized. Sovereignty has been itemized into competencies. It is less a boast than a filing system you can audit. Babylon makes the theology visible in brick. South of the great ziggurat, Enki, the temple complex of Asagila spreads like a memory that keeps being rebuilt. Courtyards ring rooms where incense hangs and tablets are kissed. Corridors remember the traffic of kings who came to be measured by rituals older than they were. The city plants its tallest claim in staged mud and baked clay, raises stairs under the sky, and declares with architecture what the epic has sung. The world has a center, and that center carries a charter. Even those who later polemicize against Babylon point at the same tower when they dream of human ambition shaped like a mountain. Ritual nails the rearrangement into time. Each spring, when barley thinks about turning green and the air tastes new, the new year, the Akitu, reauthorizes the world. Priests fumigate, bathe the precincts, and perform the choreography of renewal. The creation epic is recited, not as mere literature, but as an annual reissuance of the charter that put Marduk in the chair and set the council in order. To hear the epic then is to watch the minutes of the first meeting read aloud, so the city can agree again to be itself. The king is ritually humbled and restored, not to flatter a god but to remind a ruler that his office is downstream of a decision made in a room he does not control. Here is the secret hidden in the pageantry. Babylon does not abolish the elders, it organizes them. The Anunnaki do not evaporate into flattery, they become the staffed ranks of a cosmic administration with Babylon as its filing hub. In some traditions from the Middle Babylonian period onward, language tilts. The Anunnaki increasingly label the underworld's august powers while the Igigi carry the upper airs, but the reshuffle is less a schism than a division of labor in a system learning to scale. Even in the Enuma Elish, it is Marduk who assigns the Anunnaki their positions, which is another way of saying that old names acquire new desks without losing their seniority. The bureaucracy thickens, but the council remains the council. Politics writes subplots in the margins of myth. After wars and lootings, a Babylonian king brings home the statue of Marduk. Prestige returns with the effigy as if a city's breath had been caught and released. The enthronement hymn scales accordingly, and by the time the epic is standardized, Marduk is not merely victorious, he is necessary. Even Assyria, in its confident hours, edits copies of the epic to place Assur where Marduk stood, proving by imitation that the grammar of cosmic kingship had become a template. The divine cabinet is portable. The charter can be recopied with a new letterhead. Continuity is the point. Inside a sagala, the procedures feel domestic, which is to say binding. A high priest lifts water from river wells and sprinkles the chapel. Cedar resin smears door jambs that remember hands. Censers hiss with juniper. Formulae are recited whose vowels seem to oil the hinges between heaven and precinct. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the complex, a scribe face traces a wedge so straight you can feel authority in the angle. None of this pageantry is ornamental. It is the city's way of keeping the file copies current, resealing, rereading, recommitting to the order that Marduk enforced and the Anunnaki maintain. Step back and the administrative beauty is stark. In Sumer, power sounded like a chorus of cities, Uruk, Uar, Lagash, each with a patron whose pride was also policy. In Babylon, the chorus is conducted. You can hear in the epic's architecture the shift from municipal ritual to imperial calendar. You can feel in the Akitu the comfort and the danger of centralization. Comfort because a wide land can breathe and sink. Danger because when a center falters, everything that leaned on its timing wobbles. That is why the epic lingers on the tablet of destinies. It is not a trinket, it is a regulator. In the wrong hands, even wind forgets how to be weather. In the right hands, rivers remember their banks. What, meanwhile, of the elders' double seat, above as council, below as bench? Babylon does not erase it, Babylon refines it. The underworld remains staffed by judges whose faces we are not invited to study. The upper chamber remains an assembly whose votes arrive as seasons and laws. The difference now is the clarity with which appointment flows. A central god who conquered chaos now signs the orders that seat the rest. The Anunnaki's authority, once ambient, is rendered procedural. If you want to know who weighs a life, ask the bench. If you want to know who schedules the weighing, ask the throne. The city makes a museum of its theology. Enki, house, foundation of heaven and underworld, couples the axis, stairs for ascent, footings sunk toward the Apsu. Sagala, house whose head is raised high, houses the scripts that teach a king how to be small so the city can be large. Clay tablets inside rooms hold land grants, oaths, tax records, the mundane shadows of the cosmic charter. You can walk from an archive that binds a field to a name into a hall where the world's binding is recited, and the transitions feel natural, because to Babylon they are the same activity at different scales, writing reality down so it can be held to its word. Even the way Babylon absorbs older material reveals the secret of its dominance. Editorial mercy. The city does not cancel Enlil, it translates him. It does not silence Inanna/Ishtar, it stages her with a new overture. The Igigi are not dismissed, they are docketed. Power expands by giving everyone a seat and then drawing the seating chart. When the hymn reaches its long doxology, name after name pinned to Marduk like medals, you can hear a quiet promise beneath the thunder. Your cult will live inside ours. Your shrine will be read into our temple's map. Your god's craft will become one of our king's competencies. Empires that last practice this grammar. There are, of course, costs that cannot be paid with incense. Centralization breeds brittle habits. Scribes who know only one script forget how to improvise. A city that believes its stair mountain will always be climbed may neglect the canals that keep its barley from biting its own tongue with salt. And yet, for centuries the arrangement holds. Spring after spring the epic is read. Reading after reading, the city remembers that its throne is an office inside a larger office. Office after office, the elders' signatures are renewed on the air. At night, a lamp guttering in a side room throws a small light across a tablet that some modern curator will someday label Creation Epic Tablet 4. The wedges look tidy enough to be new. A hand, calloused, ink-smudged, traces the line that says the Tablet of Destinies was wrested from the unfit bearer and sealed. In that verb lives Babylon's most honest boast: to rest is to work. Order in this vision is not a birthright, it is a discipline you must strain to keep. The elders remain elders, the council remains itself, but now they sit inside a system that expects them to be punctual. So the desks are moved, the nameplates slid, the minutes amended. No trumpet announces the change. Barley does by ripening on time. Rivers do by remaining in their lanes. Judges do by quoting clauses that outlive kings. From Sumer to Babylon is a story not of new gods but of new scheduling. In that schedule, the Anunnaki are less a rumor of greatness and more the staff roster of a functioning court. Marduk is less a conqueror than a director who knows the orchestra by name, and the Tablet of Destinies is less a magical charm than a symbol of the sober truth that civilizations survive by remembering what they promised yesterday and planning to mean it again tomorrow. In a glass case that turns fingerprints into ghosts, a cylinder no longer than a finger sleeps on a velvet bed. Beside it, like a shadow unrolled, lies the impression it once made. A slim ribbon of figures, king before God, star above crescent, a priest's hand lifted, a mountain shown as steps. The stone itself is quiet, its image is busy. If the tablets gave the world its minutes, seals gave the minutes their signatures. To roll a seal across wet clay was not ornament, it was authorization. An authorization in this civilization looked like a story small enough to wear on a cord. Lean closer. The scene is not random. A minor deity leads a mortal by the wrist toward a seated power. Between them hovers a ring and a rod, the tools of measuring, that the divine hand extends like a license. The rod straightens lines, the ring holds them together. This is not only theology, it is surveying. With these two you can lay a wall straight, judge a case true, portion barley fairly. The picture says what a paragraph would take an afternoon to copy. This man measures in the name of that God. His judgments will be shaped by the geometry of heaven. Turn the cylinder in the light. A nick on its rim becomes a hill, a shallow cut becomes a beard. Every line matters because every line repeats. The art is carved in reverse so that, rolled, its mirror becomes law. The trick produces a second trick. When the seal is worn for decades, the image on tablets grows faint at the edges. The city can watch an official's authority literally blur. When a dynasty ends, seals are recut, a name pared away, a symbol added, a star sharpened. Power leaves fingerprints in hardness as soft as soapstone, and later readers learn to follow those prints the way fishermen learn a river's hidden current. Across town, in a temple court that smells of cedar and kettle ash, a stone stands that does not move. Its top is a garden of symbols, a horned crown for the sky god, a crescent for the moon, a star with many points for the brilliant lady who loves war and love at once, a disk with saw-like rays for the sun that hears oaths by day. Below the garden runs text, clauses, grants, threats, the record of a king's gift of land to a family whose name is now a notch on a broken edge. This is a boundary stone, a kaduru. It does what seals do but at a shout instead of a whisper. Its pictures are a roster of witnesses, its words are a grid laid across a field. No fence can keep out a powerful neighbor, but a stone like this can summon a god into a quarrel and make theft look like blasphemy. The secret here is not hiding, it is display. The stone is placed where eyes must pass, and those who cannot read the clauses can still read the sky on top. Crescent, star, disk, horned crown, the four symbols that say, in a language older than grammar, this is watched. In a world where justice travels by procession, the Kuduru is a stand-in parade. The gods arrive by signs. The land is blessed by picture. The curse on violators is written in a line that hardens overnight. The underworld judges do not need to be named to be present. Their authority is the hush that falls when someone points at the stone and says nothing more. Stand back until the stone and the seal fit in the same frame. Two scales of the same thought. The small object is mobile, private, rolled over tablet throats when the terms are right. The big object is fixed, public, leaned on by elbows when a dispute grows warm. Between them stretches the infrastructure of a people who believe that stories have shapes you can touch, and that touching those shapes makes the world behave. They did not separate the sacred from the procedural. A priest's hand smells of resin and bitumen and law at once. Now climb. The street narrows between walls until the view breaks open into steps, flights lifting mud brick toward an artificial horizon. A ziggurat is an argument in tears. Its name tells you what it wants, to be the bond between earth and heaven, foundation sunk into fresh water below, capstone aimed at cloud. It is not a tower for spies or a palace for a tyrant. It is a stage where the calendar can be seen. Festivals climb it, laments descend, priests carry gods in palanquins that sway like boats on a fixed dry sea. Each terrace is a sentence in a long prayer you walk. To mount it is to read. If you pry loose a brick from a fallen face, you will find a name pressed on its belly. Kings who commissioned these heights stamped batches with their signatures, so that future hands would remember who poured their days into this mountain. Foundation boxes, small pits at the corners, hold offerings, pegs hammered deep, figurines of a smiling ruler clutching a stake, tablets wrapped in bitumen, beads blue as a winter noon, sometimes even models of tools. The deposits are both protections and publications. Notice to the earth below that a house has claimed it, and notice to the people above that the claim was made in the right style. The ground is asked to agree. Inside the precincts, the architecture lectures. Door sockets are ringed with inscriptions, names and verbs worn by centuries of sandals. Thresholds are thresholds in law as much as in stone. To step across is to enter jurisdiction. On a wall, a cone mosaic of colored clay chips makes a pattern that reads like a rug but functions like a formula. You are in a place that repeats the sky. In a side chamber, a statue of a ruler, not much taller than a child, sits with hands folded, eyes wide, inscription running across his robe like a gentle river. He lists the canals dug, the temples purified, the offerings scheduled. Even statues file reports. Archaeology, when it comes, is not a cavalry charge. It is a kneeling discipline. Trowels pare back the centuries a swallow at a time. In a trench at dawn, a patched bowl emerges with a ring of triangles. A seal impression peeks from the shoulder of a jar. A brick stamped with a familiar name sits where a wall once turned. The best secrets are not dramatic. They are procedural. A fine spot shows that a seal type travels along a trade road. Residue analysis on a storage jar tells of sesame and date wine. An inscribed door socket proves that a sanctuary plan has been rebuilt 3 times on the same axis, like a sentence revised for clarity. The ruins teach not miracles but schedules. And yet, if you hold a lamp at the right angle, miracles appear. A rolling track across a tablet's reverse, nearly invisible in daylight, flashes into legibility and reveals the name of the official who authorized a debt. A faded star on a boundary stone, scraped by generations of hands, blooms. A chipped goddess regains the line of her eye. The technique is nothing mystical, just angle and patience, but its effect feels like resurrection. This is how the past cooperates. It does not shout. It allows itself to be read again if the reader will bend. Stone is not the only archive. It is the most stubborn. Shell, lapis, and carnelian have their own voices. A bead of blue from a mountain far to the east rides the neck of a woman in a city of canals. A carnelian eye looks out from a goat-headed lyre. A shell inlay shows a procession, musicians, soldiers, cupbearers, so near to our own parades that it aches. These materials trace the routes by which ideas walked. With them came styles, techniques, words. With them too came the discipline of counting. Tallies recorded, sealings on baskets, labels clipped to jars with clay. Beauty arrived pre-numbered. Consider the small miracle of a humble tag. A lump of clay pressed over a knot in a cord, rolled with a seal, set to harden in the air. When a courier arrives with baskets of barley or jars of oil, the tag proves that the knot has not been disturbed. When the storeroom clerk breaks the tag, the broken halves keep the impression like a split oath. Later, those broken halves drift into a pit, and 1,000 years after that, a woman with a brush repeats the break with her eyes and reconstructs an afternoon in which a storehouse fed a festival. The unseen bureaucracy shines for a breath, then goes quiet again. There are doors kept by animals with human faces and beards shaped like rivers. Later ages will call them Lamassu, and their thunder is more Assyrian than Sumerian, but the lesson is the same: thresholds train the heart. You pass under a wing and are reminded that you are not the biggest thing in the room. In certain reliefs, a god within a disc rides sunlight like a boat and stretches a hand that holds a ring. In others, a king grasps a lion not to show cruelty but to show the tame line between chaos and court. These are not decorations, they are contracts in picture form. They tell you what the room expects of you before you have time to displease it. Mysteries hide in the edits more than in the shadows. A seal scene recut so the attendant who once led a mortal now leads a king. A kuduru whose upper symbols have been repolished, as if a later priest wanted the crescent to gleam more than the star. A brick stamp whose royal name is chiseled out and replaced with another hand. A political palimpsest you can trip over with your thumb. The ancients did not pretend that continuity was seamless. They mended their stories with visible stitches. The stitches are the mystery, honesty about change in a culture whose theology prized order. There is a darker secret too: absence. Rooms gutted by fire that fired clay into immortality while turning people into shadows. Libraries whose shelves collapsed and created, by accident, the safest vault. Sanctuaries where statues stood carried off as war took its tax in bronze. Absence speaks. An empty base with an intact inscription is a missing face that still names itself. A door socket with a gouged out line is the record of a name forbidden, not forgotten, not quite, scraped from daily sight but present in the scrape, in the damage that tries to erase. And there is a quieter discovery, one that refuses spectacle, the steady match between picture and procedure. The rod and ring at the top of a relief is not a metaphor in a poem, it is the blueprint in a surveyor's hand. The stair mountain is not a fantasy in a hymn, it is the route by which the calendar climbs. The star and crescent are not ornaments on a priest's sleeve, they are a legal header one can point to when a neighbor moves a fence stone by half a palm. The beauty is not separate from the bureaucracy. It is the bureaucracy's most persuasive uniform. Imagine, then, a day in the life of a city that believes as they believed. At dawn, a clerk rolls his seal across fresh tablets in a cool room and watches his authority unfurl like a little river. At noon, a judge hears a boundary quarrel in the shade of a court and taps the kuduru's cymbals when one voice grows too hot. At dusk, a procession takes the steps of the ziggurats slow enough to feel time thicken, carries a god whose eyes blink because the bearer's arms are tired, and resets the city's heart with a chant older than its walls. And somewhere in a side room, a child presses a cylinder into damp clay for the first time and laughs when the figures bloom. He has learned the trick: stories that hold. We began with a seal in a glass case. The case is shut, but the image is open. The unrolled ribbon offers a private theater you can enter with your eyes. The god's hand that grants measuring, the mortal's hand lifted in ascent, the star that watches, the mountain built as steps. This is the language by which a world told itself what it was doing. It did not hide its secrets. It engraved them in ways that required attention. The lamp and the angle are part of the ritual. If you take the time to hold the light, the stone will share its minutes with you, and for a moment the old administration will resume, charters humming, seals whispering, and you will feel, as the ancients felt, that justice is an image rolled across the day until it hardens. In a quiet room that could be anywhere, a museum basement, a university library, an attic with a single relentless lamp, a page lies open beside a tablet cast in plaster. On the page, words hurry, on the tablet, wedges hold their ground. Between them stretches a century of wishful thinking and a millennia of speech that refuses to be rushed. This is where our story turns from temples to footnotes, from incense to margins. The old gods are not on trial tonight. Our impatience is. Begin with a single sign. In the tablet room they call it dinger. It can be read as in sky, or used as a determinative, a star-shaped flag planted before a divine name to warn the reader. The word that follows is a god. It is punctuation elevated to a halo. Now picture a reader moving too quickly, hungry for a headline. The star is mistaken for a verb, came from the sky. The determinative becomes a rocket launch. Your hand hesitates above the page because you can feel what is about to happen. From a tiny misunderstanding, a planet will be invented, A traffic of deities will arrive, a genre will be born. Turn the lamp a little. The word we have been following since the beginning, Anunnaki, sits there again, cool as stone. In the schools that copy and recopy meanings until they fit like joints in a door, the term points to the offspring of Anu, the great gods, the august assembly, and in other texts to the stern bench below. The suffixes shift with grammar, not with spaceships. No wedge says, those who from heaven to earth came, though 1,000 covers would like it to. The clay does not flatter the fever. The clay is a bureaucrat, patient, precise, unforgiving. And yet a misreading is a seed the wind loves. In the late 20th century, a voice rose that learned to speak with the urgency of an announcement. It promised that the tablets contained a forgotten history, a wandering planet on an elongated ellipse, a visit that altered our species, a mining project for gold that needed human hands. It braided Sumer with Genesis, Nephilim with Anunnaki, Igigi with Watchers, and named the braid Revelation. The stars on seals became helmet windows, the rays of a sun disk became exhaust. A whole imaginary bureaucracy took its posts in a sky it had never been assigned. People listened because the story was clean where the world is messy, because the pictures looked like what they wanted to see, because secrets taste better when they accuse. Now, the harder, slower voice. Philology enters the room like a doctor who has learned to be kind without lying. It does not sneer, it arranges evidence. It shows a dictionary line, Anunna in hymns to Enlil and Enki, Anunnaki in underworld courts. Usage migrating across Sumerian and Akkadian like birds across seasons, beautiful because it is consistent. It brings out the astronomical tablets and runs a finger over Neberu, crossing, a term that can name a point, a crossing place, sometimes a planet when it plays that role, often Jupiter in lists, sometimes Mercury in others, always a function, never a rogue 12th body with a taste for drama. The voice says, softly, the word means what it means where it is used. It is a sentence so simple that it can sound like cruelty. Secrets hide in plain sight. A cylinder seal shows a star, a crescent, a god with a horned crown, a saw-toothed disc for the sun with a tiny figure inside it. Later readers will call him winged, within a craft, but the ancients knew him as the sun god, who rides the day because the day is his, who sees oaths, who blesses scales and courts. The rod and ring are not keys to a hanger, they are measurement given meaning. The god authorizes proper lengths and honest weights. The mountain with steps is not a launch pad but a ziggurat, a civic ladder that taught a festival how to climb into a calendar. The truth is less cinematic and more astonishing. A civilization invented procedures, it enforced them with stories, it carved those stories into hard things so they would not be lost. We are the ones who keep trying to swap the ledger for a rumor. Consider the Nephilim, that Hebrew word soaked in thunder, fallen ones in one line of interpretation, giants in another, the subject of its own fierce debates, yet neither linguistically nor historically a cousin of the Anunnaki. The two belong to different archives, different tongues, different covenantal anxieties. To fuse them is not a discovery, it is an advertisement. But advertisements pay for attention, and attention is the coin with which poor disciplines buy their futures. The tablets wait while the coin changes hands. Listen to the counter-narrative that never learns to shout. It is told by catalog numbers and field notes, by copies written in hands so steady they make your teeth ache. In those notes the Anunnaki sit in their familiar places, the Igigi take their younger seats, the sky and the underworld keep their borders even when choruses push against them. In those notes, Nippur is not a starport but the city that sang Enlil's seriousness into laws. Eridu is not a headquarters for extraction but the house where wisdom learned to allocate and sometimes to lose track of its cups. Uruk is not a launch cradle but a place where a queen ferried the arts upriver and, by doing so, taught us that culture is logistics. The myth in those notes is the myth we have been telling all along, the drama of order and revision. A misreading gathers power by promising to make the reader a conspirator. They hid this, it whispers, but you and I will not be fooled. It flatters the hunger to be in the room where titles are whispered and maps are not for public eyes. The older stories know that hunger too, but they answer it with procedure, not with an invitation to leap. When Inanna descends, gates open and shut by formula. When destiny changes hands, it is litigated back into its proper strap. When the flood is decreed, the loophole is whispered not as rebellion but as grammar, mercy speaking the language of law so law can hear it. The ancient secrets are the opposite of conspiracies. They are public but slow. There is a deeper danger in the confusion. When we replace councils with spacecraft, we lose the one genius that can help us. The idea that power must justify itself to something older than appetite. We lose courts. We lose minutes. We lose the comfort of procedures that cannot be stormed by armies. A rocket carrying gods would be impressive. A city carrying justice from one dynasty to the next is a miracle you can live inside. The tablets do not promise rescue by a planet. They promise accountability, which is a colder word and a warmer fate. I have watched a scholar trace the misreading to a single printed sentence, then to a citation that does not quite say what the quote claims, then to a translation that was provisional, then to a leap taken over a mode of ambiguity. The leap becomes a platform. The platform becomes a canon. From there, every wedge is drafted into service for a story it did not sign. The scholar does not gloat. She feels the old dread, how quickly a markup can become a creed, how fast a footnote can be conscripted by desire. She returns to the tablet and copies the line again, slower, and hears what it says. Not what she wants to hear, not what the market wants to sell, but what the scribe intended on a day when river light flickered on damp clay. And yet, because the world is mixed, some misreadings leave behind real gifts. Popular fantasies send a fresh crowd into the museum. A teenager who came for rockets learns to love rods and rings. A man who wanted a planet reads an epic and cries when a king touches a wall. A woman who expected helmets discovers the law's stubborn poetry and stays long enough to notice the way an underworld court gives shape to grief. The ancient astronauts fail as history and succeed, sometimes, as invitations. If they bring the uninitiated to the table, let the scholars serve bread that will not be stale in the morning. There is a quieter myth about myths that needs airing. The notion that the ancients could not have done what they did without help. The ziggurats, the canals, the calendars, the libraries, surely those were impossible feats for people with reed pens and no steel? It is a soft contempt in modern clothing. The tablets push back. They teach multiplication and metrology. They docket shipments. They compute eclipses. They choreograph empire with clay and voice. The miracle is not visitors. It is patience. The secret is not alien. It is administrative. A city that can remember itself across kings has already done something stranger than fiction. Return to the sign we started with, the star-shaped determinative. It teaches a humility that is the opposite of awe. It says, this is a god's name. It does not depict the god. It brackets the word. It is a courtesy. When we misread it for a verb, we betray a hunger to turn courtesy into drama. What the tablets ask for is respect. A pause before utterance, a measured voice, a recognition that language, like law, is a place where people meet under rules that save them from each other. A single wedge can be a hinge or a trap. It depends on how fast you want to move. In another room, the sound of a lecture, polite, tired, human, joins our lamp. A speaker lists what the texts actually say, that Neberu crosses, that Anunna convene, that Anunnaki judge, that names migrate while functions hold. He reads passages where the great gods take their seats, where underworld magistrates weigh, where a tablet is fought over not because it is magical but because it is constitutional. He is not a stirring orator, but the air around him grows bright in a way candles recognize. The brightness is not charisma. It is accuracy. And yet the other room, the one with the louder story, will always exist. It will sell books that glow in airport racks. It will pair images it should not pair and quote lines without the neighbors that give their verbs a home. Some of the buyers will never come to the museum, but some will. They will bring the hunger for secrets that the priests of old knew how to discipline into ritual and law. It falls to us, if we love any of this, to receive them without scorn and to hand them a tablet that weighs enough to slow the hand. If you are tempted to ask why any of this matters, why not let the myths about myths live as myths? Return to the bench below. Imagine someone you love standing where Inanna stood, where kings kneel and crowns become powder. Imagine the voice that answers being as careless with words as a pamphlet. Justice depends on correct reading. A mistranslation at the gate is a cruelty without a face. In a civilization that believed oaths could bind storms, accuracy was piety. Under lamps in rooms that smell of dust and patience, it still is. We end where we began, a page and a tablet cast. The page will be revised, the cast will not. Between them, a reader who allows a single sign to be itself. He does not rush. He does not pretend a determinative is a verb or a crossing is a planet or a bench is a launch. He reads slowly enough to hear the council clear its throat before speaking. Outside, a city hums that looks nothing like Uruk and everything like it. Meetings, minutes, measurements, festivals that keep people in step with seasons that do not ask their permission. We can choose which myth to serve, the one that flatters our hunger for rescue, or the one that trains us to be rescued by each other, across time, with rules we keep and words we honor. The clay is not against wonder. It is against haste. Its mysteries are not jewels hidden behind curtains. They are meanings stored in plain sight, difficult only because they require attention. The ancient habit that saved cities is available to us. Read twice, swear carefully, weigh before you name. When you do, the Anunnaki return to their seats, the bench below resumes its quiet, and the world, which is always flirting with accident, remembers the grammar we inherited from strangers who knew how to make meaning stand. At first the change is a matter of handwriting. A sharper angle in the wedge, a taller, drier ductus, a habit of spacing that leaves more air between the signs. The words are not different, only their gait. Sumer has given way to Akkad, Akkad to Babylon, Babylon to Assyria, Assyria back to Babylon, and then, like a last tide, kings who sign in Greek take the stage. Empires turn the tablets like pages and keep reading. The Anunnaki do not vanish in this flipping. They fade and return, relocate in the margin, reappear in a line where you did not expect them. It is not death. It is afterlife. An afterlife is rarely a clean room. It is a workshop of substitutions. A title acquires an epithet. A god picks up a foreign surname. A court below gains new furniture while its sentences weigh the same. If you stand in a library long enough, you can hear the edits as weather. A gust when an Assyrian scribe sharpens Enlil into Assur's profile. A calm when Babylon reasserts its charter with Marduk at the chair. A dry wind when Seleucid clerks write Greek notes in the margins of cuneiform accounts and carry forward rites in alphabets that never saw a read. The elders, the Anunnaki, move through these drafts with the stubbornness of function. Where there is a council to justify power, there they are. Where there is a bench to receive the dead, there they sit. Assyria prefers its gods in relief. Basalt remembers beards combed like rivers and robes that hang with the weight of law. Winged figures lift a hand to a tree that is not a tree but a design of order. Within a disk, a god whose office is day extends a ring. If you ask where the Anunnaki are in this picture, the guide shrugs toward the background. They are the expectation more than the portrait, the quorum that makes the raised ring legal. You do not have to carve a council to obey it. You only have to behave as if a quorum waits behind the curtain of sky. Under the dust of Nineveh, an imperial library gathers a world. Laments and lexical lists, copybook hymns and omen series, rituals for eclipses, incantations for bites, king's letters fretting over horses and omens and brick quotas, all shelved in rooms that smell of leather and clay. Here the elders' afterlife looks like reference. A tablet names the great gods, another the Anunnaki, a third places them below as the seven who hear. The compilers do not argue it, they index it. Their city needs a map of meaning more than a dissertation, and the Anunnaki survive because a map without a chord is useless to a king. In a different quarter, a woman reads a prayer to the goddess who loves war and pleasure alike, and the prayer lists, with the patience of a clerk, her stations in the courts above and below. She has a seat among the elders, she has a procedure before the judges. Courts that can absorb such a woman live longer than those that cannot. In her voice is the secret that makes afterlives possible. Identity that can carry more than one badge without dropping either. The Anunnaki's badge in this era is not a face but a portfolio, those who decree, those who judge. Whoever fulfills the portfolio is wearing the badge, whether or not the headline prints the old name. Exile is the strangest editor. When people who learned the calendar in Babylon sing their psalms in another tongue, they carry some furniture in their minds. Benches below, councils above, fate decreed and sometimes revised. They do not adopt the elders, they remember the structure. In time, literature flowers in which books open with courts, angels sit where elders once sat, and decrees descend like weather. It is not theft. It is the persistence of a civic theology. The world is governed by procedure. The Anunnaki, unnamed, continuous form. Then the Greeks arrive, sandals dusty, curiosities wide. They ask good questions with a tourist smile. Which god is your Zeus? Which city stands for wisdom? What is the story you tell at New Year to make the world remember its job? Translators answer with equations that do not quite balance and do not need to, because equivalence is a bridge, not a mirror. Marduk becomes Zeus to explain supremacy. Ishtar becomes Aphrodite when love is in question, and Athena when craft is. Nabu becomes Hermes if the topic is writing, Apollo if it is prophecy. The Anunnaki as a name resists a tidy Greek twin. The idea travels instead. A synod of powers, a senate of heaven, a bench of the dead. Philosophers hearing this are comforted. They prefer rules to appetites. If you follow the council down, it becomes geometry. In Hellenistic temples raised on Mesopotamian ground, calendars that once counted by barley crowns now walk with epicycles and ratios. Priests read the sky with Greek words for angles and Sumerian habits of obedience. Fate is not a mood, it is a chart. The elders' decree migrates into tables. The bench's hush enters the vocabulary of necessity. A man in white chalks a circle and writes letters where the old hymns would have named gods. The person watching does not feel betrayal. He feels promotion. A court that used to convene in story is now convening in numbers. And yet the old badges keep flashing. A boundary stone, set up in a late rain, still shows crescent, star, horn, tiara, ray wheel, witnesses carved in shorthand. A lament copied for a scholar king still begs the Anunna to return to a house they once walked through at night, to resettle dignities, to let the river keep its promise not to eat the fields. You can hear the nostalgia, but you can also hear the pragmatism. The plea is written into a procedure as if the scribe were addressing a board that never declines a petition out of boredom, only out of rules. The underworld's afterlife is subtler. In earlier lines, the 7 judges sit with faces we are not given and voices that freeze a goddess on a hook. Later, the 7 are not always numbered, and other officials take the minutes. Gatekeepers with lists, scribes with tallies, a queen who receives rather than condemns. The sentences retain their weight, but the imagery softens as cities learn to grieve more domestically. Funerary practice becomes a craft with manuals. Proper libations, favorable days, letters to the dead whose addresses have survived regime change. The bench remains the bench. The waiting room has better chairs. Mystery hides in continuity, not rupture. Why do the most powerful gods leave faintest fingerprints? Because power is most stable when it becomes grammar. In a liturgy, an elder's name is a variable that can be assigned without breaking the sentence. In law, a council is a role that can be staffed without portraits. In architecture, a ziggurat can be dismantled into a terrace and a stair and then rebuilt as a colonnade and still perform the same civic physics. Lifting time into view. The Anunnaki's survival depends on abstraction. The more they become a function, those who decree, those who weigh, the harder they are to erase. Assyria falls with a sound like fired brick cracking. Babylon takes a breath, then loses it. New crowns travel in from a coast that once sent mercenaries and now sends kings. In one garrison town, a temple calendar continues with almost no edits. In another, a reconstructed ziggurat stares at an inscription that uses other letters to promise the same protection. Priests learn to read 2 scripts in the time it took their grandfathers to master one. Across it all, a silence holds. No one drafts a proclamation retiring the elders. You cannot retire a quorum. There are entries in daybooks that tell the story better than any hymn. Today the king's head was struck and tears were on his cheek, and the priest recited the old lines. That is a key to New Year, transposed into a register of duty. Even under foreign rule, even when an army passes the gate with a standard that has no word for Enlil, the ritual insists that the throne is an office answerable to a room with older keys. If a governor refuses the right, the scribes record the refusal the way accountants record debt. The bench below does not need to punish. Neglect punishes itself. Where are the secrets? In edits that behave like fossils. A hymn that once named Enlil now names Bel, Lord, a title elastic enough to hold a change without breaking the meter. A prayer that once begged the Anunna now petitions the great gods, a safer basket when politics are volatile. On a late tablet, a scribe squeezes in a gloss. These are the Anunnaki, as if he felt a tremor in the chain and added a link. The gloss is a whisper across centuries. I remember the old badge, I am giving you the cross-reference. A traveler from Alexandria, eager to catalog, writes that Babylonians honor a god who orders the stars and a queen who travels to the shades and returns. He is not wrong and he is not right. He has captured the outline and missed the tone. But centuries later his outline will be all a reader has, and from it, if that reader is patient, the tone can be rebuilt. This is another afterlife, surviving as rumor until rumors are taken seriously enough for someone to kneel by a trench, blow dust from a wedge, and start copying verbs again. The underworld's judges, more and more, are invoked at funerals not to terrify but to equalize. In sermons that never saw a tablet room, the rich are told to remember that their names will become the same length as the poor's in the low house. In documents written by families who learn to write in markets, a quiet formula thanks those below for receiving a father without complaint. The elder's aura, once edged with ice, warms into civility. Severity does not evaporate, it becomes decorum. What survives best is habit. A builder, Hellenized by coin and contract, still hammers a peg into a foundation and mutters a blessing in a language his apprentices cannot parse. A judge, trained in two laws, still touches a boundary stone as he speaks a verdict. A bride's father pours water at a threshold with a gesture that came down the canal from Eridu and does not require a footnote. Habits are afterlives that do not know they are afterlives. They carry counsels without mentioning them. When alphabets finally replace wedges and memory becomes a library whose spines face out instead of lying in stacks, some words go to sleep. Anunnaki is one of them. But sleep is not oblivion. It is storage. In the 19th century, after another set of kings have come and gone, strangers in hats with black bands will climb cliffs, copy a royal boast carved in 3 languages, and discover the key to the old script. In reading rooms alive with lamplight, they will press their faces to glass and pronounce, with the hesitancy of reverence, the names we have followed. They will find the council where we left it, not as a team portrait but as a procedure. The elders will look up from their minutes and say, without moving their mouths, "We never adjourned." So the afterlife is not a ghost story. It is an administrative saga. The Anunnaki persist the way law persists, by being useful, by being generalized, by being assumed. Their faces blur so their function can travel. Their bench loses its edges so grief can take a seat without cutting itself. Their name fades so oaths can keep working under new flags. That is the mystery that dignifies the whole tradition. The greatest powers volunteer to become background so that cities can remain foreground. Night finds a temple precinct whose gods have gone to sleep in a language few outside the walls can read. A servant banks a lamp, folds a cloth, sets tomorrow's jug near the basin. He touches the threshold with 2 fingers because his mother taught him and because everyone taught her. In that small gesture lives the oldest counsel, unseen, unargued with, unspectacular. The cities have changed hands. The elders have not. Their afterlife is our habit of making meaning answerable to something older than appetite. Call them what you will. They are present whenever a rule is kept for the sake of the weak, whenever a boundary is honored without a witness, whenever a king, however named, however dressed, remembers to bow before a house that is not his. The museum is quiet in a way that makes you hear the gloves. Latex whispers as a conservator turns a tablet in a bath of light, and the clay, sun-baked 3,000 years ago, fire-baked by a palace blaze that made it immortal, returns a faint topography of wedges and scratches. There is no incense here, no procession, no hymn. Only lenses, raking lamps, and a camera that moves 1 millimeter at a time. But listen long enough and you will recognize the old tone. This too is ritual. This too is a city keeping its appointment with procedures. Science learned to kneel before ruins. Not in worship but in method. A trench is not a hole, it is a sentence diagrammed. Stratigraphy reads soil as clauses stacked by habit and disaster. The archaeologist cuts the earth with a trowel honed to a whisper, watching colors make decisions. Buff for wind-borne dust, gray for hearth ash, the chocolate of silt laid down by a flood that had somewhere else to be. Every scoop is dated by context, not by brash guesswork, and a wall is not a wall until its foundation joins the ground's grammar. In a notebook that will outlast the trench, a Harris matrix grows, boxes and arrows mapping which layer sealed which layer, which event cancelled which earlier claim. The story is saved not by heroics but by sequence. Time itself is a technology. Radiocarbon comes to the site in a labeled tube, a fleck of char, a bead of soot on a cooked pot, a reed stem sacrificed by a flood and trapped beneath a floor. The lab needs years from atoms. Calibration curves bend the result back to the calendar, correcting for the sky's moods. When wood is kind, rings speak in bars of light and dark, and dendrochronology turns year stacking into a clock that clicks even when kings forget their anniversaries. Weirwood will not speak, quartz does. A handful of sand, buried and then briefly exposed when a wall collapsed, gives up its last sunbath to optically stimulated luminescence. Thermoluminescence coaxes a glow from a pot that remembers the heat that made it a pot. None of these are miracles. All are laws taught to answer questions. The city's voice returns through its trash. In the buckets that come up from a courtyard's corner, seeds sleep. A charred barley grain holds the memory of a terrace garden watered yesterday and 5,000 yesterdays ago. Lupin, lentil, emmer, figure. Under a microscope, phytoliths, silica bodies the plant made to hold itself upright, go bright like stars. Starch granules, twisted like moons and then burned to a perfect black, tell you who cooked what, where. Pollen grains lift from a mud brick, each with its own geometry. The canal side is still a field if you bother to count. Science is patient enough to listen to dust. Dust is happy to talk. Animals speak in bone. Sheep and goat are both practical and confounding, but teeth get opinionated. Cusp heights, enamel microwear, the slow math of herding choices across centuries. A dog's skeleton curled under a doorway says more about attachment than an inscription ever could. Feathers are gone, but the drummer's callus on a phalanx endures. The river leaves otoliths, fish earstones, that record the water's chemistry as they grew. Strontium ratios whisper whether the catch was local or carried from a lake 2 turns upriver. In a jawbone's oxygen and carbon isotopes, a drought that no king thought to mention gets its entry in the archive. Even the glue talks. Bitumen sealing a boat plank or a jar lip carries biomarkers like fingerprints. Certain ratios tell you if it came bubbling from springs near Hit or from a more distant pool. Copper that greened a pin remembers its mountain. Let isotopes sketch a vein signature, mapping trade in a language that crosses borders more politely than armies ever do. Carnelian beads, bright as small suns, keep the trace elements of the distant riverbeds where they were rolled smooth. Lapis tells its own story. There are only a few places that sky blue stone can come from, and meshing those places with seal cutter styles gives you the vector of an idea with the stealth of a caravan. In another room, clay speaks by light alone. A tablet that looks blank to the eye flares with lines when a dome of LEDs walks around it. Reflectance transformation imaging, polynomial texture mapping, the photographer's patient sorcery. A wedge that survived only as a bruise is coaxed into reading. Multispectral rigs, black boxes with disciplined rainbows inside, pull ink ghosts from erasures and soot-coated surfaces. Computation learns to squint the way an old scribe did and begins to be useful. Convolutional networks trained on thousands of signs suggest joins between fragments that have waited a century in separate drawers. A model proposes that this and belongs with that KI, and a graduate student, skeptical by temperament and training, runs to the drawer and discovers that the algorithm has the instincts of a librarian. The libraries themselves have become cities. Scholars build them with keyboards instead of baked brick. Lexical lists keyed into open corpora. Transcriptions aligned line by line with high-resolution images. Glossaries that admit uncertainty instead of hiding it under confidence. A scribe in Nippur copying a hymn to Enlil becomes clickable. A seal legend from Uruk acquires a translation visible to anyone with patience and a screen. A broken line in a catalog finds its missing cousin from a dig long ago by a field team whose crestfallen report smelled of diesel and hope. The elders' minutes are being reassembled, not by a single hero but by a bureaucracy of care. Science finds secrets without scandal. A magnetometry survey grids a field that looks like any other field, dragging a sled back and forth until the subsurface maps itself as a ghost town in black and white. Walls, streets, a gate with towers, a canal's hard shoulder. Ground-penetrating radar draws the ghost in vertical sections, revealing staircases and door jambs without cutting a gram of earth. Drones fly because the air can conduct archaeology too. Photogrammetry stitches hundreds of images into an orthomosaic so crisp that you can count the sherds an earlier expedition missed. When declassified satellite photographs, grainy, gray, generous, go online, the land's long scars show themselves. Levees where a river once braided, canal fans that fed cities with names the wind remembers better than we do. On those images, a scholar with calloused eyes traces Sumer with a mouse and realizes that landscapes carry minutes too. In the conservation lab, the smallest noises matter. Salt that crawled into a tablet during centuries in the ground tries now to blossom as the indoor air changes. A conservator coaxes it out slowly with bats and blotters, because a hurry here is vandalism with clean hands. Consolidants drawn from trees and polymers sit ready, and each has a personality, each cures with its own breath. A cracked seal impression is rejoined with an adhesive that will not yellow. The join is set under a weight that used to be a scholar's paperweight in a previous life, now promoted to a gentle stone. The ethics are severe and tender at once. Do no harm, undo harm done, do nothing you cannot explain to a room full of the dead. There is a kind of astronomy in these rooms and it doesn't point up. The constellations are data sets. Their stars are shards. A model adjusts for the biases of modern collection. How looters favor complete pieces, how museums prefer the impressive, how early digs reported what sponsors wanted to hear. Another model guesses what a city's missing quarter might have looked like if canals and walls obey the proportions they usually obey. A third guesses how many tablets must be missing if these two survived from a broken shelf of 80 that fell toward the door. Probability enters the temple and behaves itself, which is its own small miracle. Secrets live in the humblest corners. A lump of floor from the corner of a shrine is sliced thin and looked at as if it were a star under a different sort of night. Micromorphology reads the layer cake of trodden surfaces, ash lenses from repeated burnings, dung trampled and polished by sandals, drips of fat from offerings, silt that arrived on a day when the river forgot itself. A pattern emerges, a choreography of feet at a doorway, turning a ritual from poetry into traffic analysis. At the back of a storeroom, residue swabbed from a jar neck tests positive for sesame and date. In a different jar, wine leaves a tart signature that smells faintly of a festival. A discovery changes a sentence. A tablet that adds 20 lines to a famous epic appears from a drawer where it kept an unhurried secret for decades. The new lines are not a plot twist, they are ecology. The cedar forest, once a flat stage for a duel with a monster, becomes a living home of birds, insects, and heat. The king's axe cuts not pride but habitat. The myth gains the weight of a world and therefore the weight of consequence. Science does not steal wonder, it gives wonder a location. The underworld of scholarship produces its own mysteries. A notebook by a 19th century copyist, overlooked for generations, turns up a sign copied with unusual care and annotated with a question mark. The question mark becomes an argument. The argument becomes a doctoral defense. The defense, after polite agony, becomes a lexicon entry that moves a word that had been living in heaven down to a desk on earth. The term, Anunna, flexes again across genres with the ease of a joint, and the council clears its throat where we had thought it silent. Procedure survives as long as someone is willing to be wrong in public and write slowly. Science also learns to listen to breakage. Earthquakes are teachers. A wall that fails in shear at the lower courses, bricks splayed like a deck of cards, tells of a particular wave, a particular second on a particular night when a priest dropped a lamp but the flames helped, in the end, to fire the tablets that would speak for that priest's century. A ziggurat's slumped face is not just erosion. It is a record of rain obeying gravity and salt obeying chemistry as irrigation overshot caution. The very ruin is data, an ode to limits written in fatigue. Ethics re-enter the court in new costumes. The best digs are slower than looters, and the market is a river that will not be lectured. Museums reckon with drawers that hold objects orphaned by war and greed and the poverty that usually travels with both. Provenance, once a footnote, becomes an oath. Documentation is stacked as carefully as tablets, and a photograph of a pot in situ is treated as sacred as the pot. The secret here is not shame, it is resolve, to make the archive strong enough that temptation becomes boring. Sometimes, too, the living teach. In a village near a mound, brickmakers gouge clay from a pit whose profile reads like a textbook. Their molds are modern, their kiln a circle of fire that knows recipes 1,000 years old. A potter at a wheel invented the day before yesterday demonstrates by muscle memory how a rib burnishes a rim. A fisherman ties a knot that makes sense of a jar neck 2 rooms away. Ethnography walks carefully, wary of easy analogies, but grateful for hands that still know how the old words felt. Knowledge does not only survive in stone, it survives in wrists. Computers enter the archive with humility and ambition. A neural net learns to translate Akkadian phrases into modern speech by reading tens of thousands of line pairs, and though it still stumbles on poetry, it recites contracts like a bored but reliable clerk. Another model simulates water through a digital Mesopotamian plain, testing canal widths until the barley in the simulation sings at the same dates the tablets prescribe. A third sorts seal images into families, grouping rosettes with rosettes and winged discs with winged discs, then points out a stray hybrid that likely came from a traveling cutter with a taste for mixing schools. These are not oracles, they are interns with infinite patience. Not all secrets are solved, some are refined. Climate is a suspect with an alibi and a motive. A dry stretch becomes visible in Speleothems under a hill 100 miles from any city we can name. Dust in a distant sea core thickens at the same horizon as an era of laments. A dendrochronological hiccup in timbers traded from elsewhere nods in time. The famous 4.2 kilo-year event raises its hand like a student in the back. You can see it, but you cannot blame every collapse on it. Science is a judge that knows the difference between correlation and decree. It adds a cautionary clause. Cities fall for many reasons, and some of those reasons wear crowns. What, then, of the Anunnaki in all this? They do not step off a tablet and shake a researcher's hand. They sit where they always sat, as the idea of order that survives translation into new genres. In the lab's silence, you can feel the same procedural gravity that our chapters have followed in shrines and courts. To measure, to date, to model, to collate. These are ceremonies in which the living submit to rules older than their preferences. The elders do not need incense to convene. They are present whenever a hypothesis is bound by method, whenever a result is published with its errors on display like signatures. On a shelf, a small figurine with folded hands looks past you. Its inscription is short: a name, an office, an address to a god whose portfolio includes listening. That figurine's clay, sampled and tested, matches a pit in the next valley. The slip on its surface, smoothed with care, retains the lines of a cloth that wrapped it when it was new. Science makes the humble dramatic not by inflating it, but by letting it keep its proportions. The secret is that the proportion was always dramatic. We had forgotten how to see it under proper light. In a reading room whose windows are never quite clean, a student copies a line from a hymn and stumbles on a word that once meant decree and later means office. She writes both glosses, then both dates, then both cities where each usage is strongest. Her margins become a topography of caution. She is building a small ziggurat out of pencil marks, each step a concession to context. By the end of the night, she has learned the oldest lesson, that accuracy is a form of reverence. Down the hall, a 3D printer hums apologetically, printing a mount that will cradle a tablet without pinching it. On the monitor, a model of a room we will never walk through scrolls by, a shrine reconstructed from foundation pegs, drain lines, and the stubborn logic of doors. The model includes a beam of morning light at a particular angle because the compass still works even for houses that no longer exist. The print finishes. A conservator fits the mount and smiles the smile of someone who has made a small thing behave beautifully. The oath that keeps cities human is spoken without words. Do it right and then write down how you did it. In the field, the day ends when the dust turns the air copper. Tools are counted aloud. Fines are checked against their tags. Tarps are pulled. A string of camels on the horizon makes a sentence you can almost read. The mound goes back to being a mound, which is its way of keeping a secret without malice. Night belongs to jackalls and to laptops. Someone will enter context numbers in a spreadsheet whose columns align with a database 1,000 miles away. Someone else will label photos in a folder whose names are a new kind of tablet. The work is ordinary in the way oaths are ordinary, binding because everyone agrees to be bored by shortcuts. Science does not rescue the past from myth. It restores to myth the one dignity myth cannot afford to lose: responsibility. A court below still waits in story for those who break the city's agreements. A council above still gathers in ritual to schedule seasons and judge kings. Here in the ruins, the living convene their own bench. Rules of evidence, methods that can be audited, conclusions that can be appealed. The elders we have followed through floods and tablets look on from their old seats, satisfied not by piety but by the familiar music of procedure. The clay for its part remains clay. It does not flatter or lie. It tells its minute truths in wedges and grit, and those truths, once assembled, make a world orderly enough to mourn and to repair. Under this lamp, the tablets go quiet, but the questions don't. We've walked the rooms behind the myths, a council that made storms answer to minutes, a goddess who learned humility one gate at a time, a thief with feathers teaching law to post a guard, a king who came back from the edge with something harder than immortality: responsibility. We peeled rumor from reading, then let science kneel to the ruins until the clay spoke again. If there's a single thread through it all, it's this: Civilizations don't run on thunder, they run on vows kept in public. Now I want to hear from you. Which moment changed the way you see these stories? The reed wall whisper, the blue beads after the flood, Ninurta's sling, or the final again in a classroom? Drop your answer in the comments with one sentence that begins, "The rule I'd write on a tablet is," I'm pinning the most thoughtful ones. Tell me what you want next on this channel. Vote below and pitch your own idea. This series is a council, your voice sits at the table. If careful wonder is your thing, where awe shares a room with evidence, tap like so the algorithm keeps the lamps on. And if you want more long, cozy dives into history, myth, and the quiet science that stitches them together, subscribe and ring the bell. It tells me to make the next episode and tells you when it's ready. Before you go, type these 4 in the comments so they live here too. Measure, weigh, remember, repair. That's the last oath, and the first step. Thanks for watching, for thinking slowly with me, and for helping build a corner of the internet where old councils keep their seats and new questions get good minutes.